Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, July 1st, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Anthony McCann, author of A Western Tale of America in Crisis, Shadowlands, Fear and Freedom at the Oregon Standoff. Also on the program today, Trump wilts may settle for a North Korean nuclear freeze versus a drawdown. Meanwhile, the country we had convinced to do a drawdown has now broken the stockpile limit set by the now destroyed Iran deal. Federal judge forces the Trump administration to allow doctors to inspect their migrant concentration camps, and new reports suggest that the DHS was warning of riots 2 months ago. Things were so bad. Meanwhile, in the wake of the first debates, Joe Biden drops because of his debate performance and everything else he says. Meanwhile, fundraising numbers in. Buttigieg raises $24 million in Q2. Hong Kong protesters storm Parliament on the anniversary of its return to China. And the latest on Lava Jato, key witness changed his story multiple times to implicate Lula. Harvard says F you to a generation of kids in Flint, Michigan, and names Rick Snyder as a fellow. To be fair, they just started their new criminal pollution of the environment program. So, and lastly, George Soros teams up with the Koch brothers to do, what do we call those episodes?
Crossovers?
To do a crossover episode in funding an anti-war think tank.
Like Jetsons meet the Flintstones.
Yeah, exactly.
Some good people involved with it so far.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. But all that and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. You'd think like a George Soros could just step up and do it himself. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think if anything, the critique should be, why are there not more, where's Steyer? Like, why are there not more liberal plutocrats willing to oppose interventionism? That they have to, do something like this. But I know, like, as an example, like Sri Parsi is a big part of it.
Yes.
He's been instrumental in Iran efforts.
I've heard
Basevich. Yes. I mean, we need these people to be funded and working on this.
All I'm saying is, if you're inclined to stop war, which I don't think most billionaires necessarily are, I would imagine a significant portion of them make their money in some fashion or another by war, conflict, the fallout from war or conflict, et cetera, et cetera. If you're inclined to do that, why give the Koch brothers some measure of cover? But to each their own. I know it's intolerant of me to suggest on how someone should pay their, that they should use their billions of dollars for. But that was actually, you recorded it from...
I guess I just realized you can hear us laughing over top of it.
We could have had that clean.
He was being very honest.
All right. So, Joe Biden, his polling numbers dropped 5 points in the wake of the poll, according to a Morning Consult. Still in the lead, but under the Seder theorem of the demise of Joe Biden, postulated months ago that by October, early October, maybe late September, he would be third in the polls, which may be subject to amending in terms of like fourth in the polls. What we'll see now is that every point in which he drops in the polling begin to create more downward pressure than it would for most candidates, because his biggest selling point is that he can win. And every time he drops, allegedly. And every time he drops in the polls, it is evidence that maybe he can't win. Maybe he's just not that good of a campaigner. Maybe he's not aware of who he's talking to or what his liabilities are. But hold your horses. The debate's not everything. This guy's going to get out there this past weekend, and try and change some minds. Show that he's still sharp as a tack. Here he is. This is at a Chicago rally. What day was this? On Saturday. And he's trying to show that, hey, he's with it. He's hip, man. He knows the score on the street. Listen to him talking about how he understands the plight of Black America.
We need to reform the criminal justice to make sure black mothers feel confident when they send their son out on the street that he's going to be safe. We got to recognize that kid wearing a hoodie may very well be the next poet laureate and not a gangbanger. Ladies and gentlemen, there are too many black men, and I might add women, in prison.
All right. Now, when he says we've got to recognize that the guy in the hoodie may be a poet laureate and not a gangbanger, is he aware that most people recognize that? That the problem, he's obviously referring to Trayvon Martin, right? That's where the whole concept of hoodies became a thing. That the problem with Zimmerman killing Trayvon Martin was that he was bigoted and presumed, and there was a lot of people saying, like, you shouldn't be wearing a hoodie, blah, blah, blah. The vast majority of Americans is quite aware that a black kid in a hoodie is not necessarily a gangbanger. But I would also add that there's also something in between. You don't have to be a poet laureate to be allowed to walk through a gated community. You don't have to be a poet laureate to not have the cops roll up on you. You can just be a dude. You can just be like a guy who's going to be, I don't know, a clerk at a store, or a plumber, or a doctor, or a dancer, or a
father,
or a waiter,
or a waiter, or a podcast
gay waiter,
or a seller of hoodies. You could be just about anything. And I don't know, his construction is a little convoluted from that segment. And I don't know if the question is like, we want to curb violence, but or you shouldn't have to be afraid of the cops abusing you. I think that's the case regardless of what you are. Right? I mean, I think and I don't think that all the gangbangers are just gangbangers all the time.
Yeah, like even if you are a gangbanger, you still have rights, like the right not to be murdered when walking down the street.
Yeah, that's the thing is I couldn't tell from his construction if he was saying protect them from the cops or protect them from violence or whatever it is. But the bottom line is that Joe Biden thinks he's talking to a nation of racists, and he's the voice of reason.
So in addition
hey
to body
guys, you got to
cameras-
understand. You have these old concepts in your head that if a black kid's wearing a hoodie, that he's a gangbanger.
Meanwhile, I just saw this great showcase of underprivileged kids who go to LaGuardia, and they were reading poetry. That's the Biden plan. In addition to body cameras, before a kid gets drugs planted on him or attacked by some random freak in a housing development, Biden would have a special tactical team trained to check if inside the kid's backpack there's a poetry collection. Oh. And then you could judge the merits of how far that work will get him.
Forgive me, Father, I have sinned. I thought that maybe a black kid could be a poet laureate. I'm sorry.
Wait, this kid's scribbling poetry.
I mean, this is the type of stuff.
Oh, no poetry. Take him out.
If there's one thing cops have respect for, it's poets.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, hold on, Vic. This kid's got some fucking poetry. Don't slam his head into the concrete.
But the more that Joe Biden does this type of stuff, he basically shows like, look, I'm sorry. You're at a rally in Chicago. You're clearly talking about criminal justice reform because you know you have a liability here. So this is your A game. You're bringing out your A game. And you're trying to convince people, I'm not the guy that I'm being parodied or satirized about. I know this stuff. And I know that just because you wear a hoodie doesn't mean you're a gangbanger, right? Who's with me? I mean,
heard of Saul Williams?
This is a liability that when the chips are down, when he's got to deliver on something, he can't do it because he just has not really opened his eyes. I look, I don't know why. I don't know if it's because he's still the way he was 30 years ago, or he's progressed, but he just hasn't progressed that much, or he doesn't realize where the rest of the country is, or I don't know what it is. But it doesn't matter. It matters whether he can deliver on that moment. That's part one. So part one is Joe Biden just showed us in that earlier clip that he is a little bit rusty when it comes to trying to be the vanguard for racial justice in this country. His whole hoodie does not make you a gangbanger, as if it's a revelation to everybody in Chicago. Well, here he is basically doing the same thing when it comes to the LGBTQ community.
I was wondering when he was going to get around to them.
Well, he is at, where was this one? What is this clip from?
A human rights campaign ceremony in September of 2018.
Okay, but he just said it the other day, though, too. He said it in Seattle, but we don't have the video of that. Okay, so in Seattle, he gave a quote, which went like this. He said, this was just like, a day or two ago, right? He said, if you come here in Seattle, he said, saying 5 years ago, if someone at a business meeting in Seattle made fun of a gay waiter, people would just let it go. This is according to a pool report. The audience vocally responded to the remark, and some of the crowd said, no. It's that you're in 2014, if people had made gay comments in Seattle.
I don't know about Seattle, buddy.
Well, I'm pretty sure that most of your major cities, in fact, in the country, if somebody had said that. In fact, I think probably all your major cities, if they had said it around a table, someone would have said, really? Like, that was a little anachronistic even 5 years ago. But apparently, he loves this anecdote and will not let it go. He said this a year ago. Now, remember the timeline. 2014 in Seattle, they're doing, business guys are doing gay jokes. Here we go.
You guys have done more to free straight women and men than you have gays and lesbians. And you think I'm kidding. So you don't misunderstand me. Think about this one example. A lot of you are very successful businessmen and women. If you were at a fancy restaurant in Washington 5-6 years ago at an important business meeting, and a gay or lesbian waiter came up, or transgender, spoke with a lisp or demonstrated they were gay or lesbian, and someone at that luncheon table made fun of that person, no one would have said anything. Not a joke. I want you to literally think about this. Today, if that same thing happened, the other 4 or 5 people at the table say, "You horse's tail, get out of here." Really?
I love that horse's tail.
Now,
I'm going to incorporate that.
Now, his point is well taken, but for some reason, he keeps changing the timeline in a very weird way, because apparently in 2014, he told this story, and it was about, and he used it 15 years ago for 1999. So in 2014, he thought that era was over. In 2019, he thinks that era still existed in 2015. The point being is he's got these catchphrases which suggest that he was in the vanguard of something, and he doesn't realize that things have changed, how dramatically things have changed. Exactly. It's like he learned to like pop. You know, like he could do that when like we used to, do this thing with the breakdancing, and he learned to pop, and he just assumed like I can hang on to this for the rest of time and be the guy on the dance floor who looks like he's really with it. Just to give you an example about what was going on 5 years ago, this was a hidden camera ABC show that they did in Mississippi. In a restaurant to see how people would react to gay people 5 years ago. Just to give you a sense, Joe Biden is extremely out of touch.
Are you serious?
See?
What did they do?
They're making out.
These guys. Come on.
But they're gay.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Are you gay?
No.
Are you gay?
No.
These guys have reached their limit, and now they head off to find their server.
Is there a problem?
Also an actor working for us.
There's that gay couple over there. She keeps calling them out, telling them they need to leave because they're...
But instead of kicking Tracy out, our waiter asks our couple to leave.
Excuse me, guys. I just spoke with my manager. We're going to have to ask you to leave just because of people's religious beliefs.
We have to leave?
Yes.
Whatever. Let's just go. Let's go. This is...
I'm sorry. It's okay.
He's visibly shaken and upset. Meanwhile, Tracy just keeps pushing.
You understand why I had them kicked out, right?
No, not at all. There's a reason why half the world hates America, and it's people like you. Because you have no acceptance for anything else in the world. I'm so pissed right now.
I know, I can see. I'm not trying to make you mad.
Get out, because there is no point in you sitting here talking to me when I'm the whole...
He was pretty pissed. Now, that is, first of all, obviously a typical example of how intolerant the left is.
She was trying to have an exchange of ideas, and I'm gay married.
But he might not even have been on the left. He could just be like,
I know. I'm joking.
No, he was on the left. He was a socialist.
The point is, Joe Biden, every time he opens his mouth and tries to say something nice and helpful, he's just out of touch. He has lost sight of where America is. And that is why, in many respects, a lot of people feel like his candidacy is so regressive. And look, Joe Biden's very popular in the LGBTQ community because many people give him a lot of credit for marriage equality. And some of that may be warranted. But the fact is that if you're worried about Joe Biden's ability to get elected, this should really bother you. Because again, like he could tell this anecdote over and over again. That's all well and good, and that's fine. And like I say, I think that he deserves some credit for marriage equality as much as anybody, at least within the context of the Obama administration, without a doubt. But if this is his wheelhouse, there's a problem.
Yeah, he's like the creepy white family in Get Out, where they're trying to show they're not racist, and the dad's like, I would have voted for a third term for Obama if I could have.
Yeah, it's not even that I think that he's I think he has more of a problem on race than he does, frankly, on LGBTQ issues. But the issue is that he doesn't know where the country's at. And that is, I think, a big problem for him. But we'll see. We'll see if other people think it is, because I'm not the only one in charge of that, apparently. Hey, just a reminder, support for today's show comes from The New Yorker. The New Yorker represents the best writing in America today. You can enjoy the works of Emily Nussbaum. She's the television critic for The New Yorker, who in 2016 won the Pulitzer Prize for criticism. You could check out Doreen St. Felix, staff writer at The New Yorker, who covers the highs and lows of today's culture. 2019, she won the Ellie Award for columns and commentary. Or John Cassidy, who covers politics and economics for The New Yorker. All of it, folks. You know The New Yorker. It's the most prominent periodical in the country. Cassie's written articles on topics ranging from the intelligence failures before the Iraqi War to the economics of John Maynard Keynes. Right now, you could head over to NewYorker.com. There's a story. Will Hunter Biden jeopardize his father's campaign? John Hickenlooper's war on socialism. Democrats cautiously return to the war on poverty, we see. And then there's stuff about the Democratic primaries moving margins. It's a lot of political stuff. Trump's curious rendezvous with Kim Jong-un. I can only... and then Oregon's tsunami risk, which I did not know about. There's stories on Turkey, the politics that are going on in Turkey right now. Robert Caro on LBJ. Matt just literally couldn't help himself. The crossword, New Yorker. Every time we do a New Yorker ad, actually, I have bragging rights with my folks. Finally think that what I'm doing is legitimate. You get 12 weeks for just $6, plus the New Yorker tote bag, weekly home delivery of the print edition, and unlimited access to NewYorker.com with 10 to 15 exclusive site-only stories every day. This is when you go to NewYorker.com/majority and enter the code majority. You'll be able to access the apps, the online archives, the crossword puzzle, and more. Again, that's NewYorker.com/majority. Enter the code majority to save 50% on a 12-week subscription and get the exclusive tote. All right, check that out, folks. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Anthony McCann on Shadowlands Fear and Freedom at the Oregon Standoff. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program poet and author Anthony McCann, author of A Western Tale of America in Crisis, Shadowlands, Fear and Freedom at the Oregon Standoff. Of course, this is about the Bundy takeover of the Mahler National Wildlife in 2016. Anthony, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Glad to be here.
So I want to start with this question, and then, we'll get into part of the story. The book comes out, I guess it's tomorrow, and so people can check it out.
That's what they say.
And there's a lot of stuff obviously happening in the news that, if not directly related to this in Washington State, certainly, I guess, tangentially so. At least in terms of the spirit of what's going on. But I want to start with asking you about a quote from your book, because you did a tremendous amount of reporting. You covered obviously the things that led to the takeover and then the trial itself. But there was one guy who was a part of the Bundyites, a guy named Jason Patrick, who had sort of joined this group. As sort of a someone who I guess was suspicious, not suspicious, maybe suspicious, but as a critique of sort of state power in the form of police officers. And at one point, Patrick tried to make common cause with Black Lives Matter, and one of the leaders of the local Don't Shoot organizations, Tressa Rayford, I guess it was.
Don't Shoot Portland.
Yeah.
Teresa Rayford, yeah. She's actually running for mayor of Portland right now.
Oh, is that right? Well,
Teresa.
she had said his ideas are who he thinks he is. Will you just talk about that and then let's go into the story? Because I'm just curious as to, explain to people what that means.
I'd be glad to. Thank you. That's for me, that's a real touchstone quote in the whole book for me. And it's such a simple quote, but so complex what Teresa, I think, is saying there about Jason, who is very sincere about his opposition to police militarization and police abuse, and is sincere in his desire to ally with Teresa and that cause, and has done a lot of work along those lines as part of more the libertarian conservative wing of police militarization critique, which has been pretty strong for a long time. But, he's part of also this Bundy circle. And Jason himself, to his credit, was not surprised when Teresa was not interested in allying with him because of the baggage that his group brings. What I took Teresa's quote as saying, and what she's saying there, I believe, is that it's not enough to live inside the abstractions, right? Your big universal generalizations that underneath all of this is history, with tremendous gravitational and deformative force on persons and bodies and institutions, and that you can't just pretend that you are what you say, and you can't operate as if that's true, because then you will blithely and naively go into situations and just mess things up, right? And in the worst case scenarios, end up just re-perpetuating either symbolically or actually the violence of the past, when you don't actually attend to the work of understanding how, as a human being, we are historical beings. And that means that, we're traversed by a lot of ugliness, and that our ideas, which may be on the surface might seem universal and good and beautiful and true, are also traversed by that ugliness.
I think this is, this describes so much of what I think we talk about, particularly in this era, because so much of it seems, so much of our political moment seems to be, is obviously everything is on some level rooted in the past, but so much of it is being brought up and maybe it's because of just the sort of like the fire hose of information that we get now, that sort of like historical context and the history that imbues all, positions and policies and opinions are sort of like almost inaccessible. We can't sort of climb over the huge surge in information, but so much of this lack of historical context, it seems to me, imbues everything right now. And so just, I mean, go a little bit, give us something like a little bit more tangible. I mean, when this guy goes out there and says, like, you know, I've got a problem with the way that the cops treat citizens, like, where, get more specific, because you write that much of what happened with these Bundyites, I guess, you know, harkens back to the failure of Reconstruction.
Yes, for me it does. Yeah. Well, I think that the whole era, to me, I saw, and this is where I think the history comes in and connects also with a huge part of our neoliberal dispensation, which would also be the social media dispensation, and the effect of that on governance, and with also those companies emerging as almost governing structures, all plays into this story too. But the story of the occupation itself, right, I see as deeply connected to that period of Reconstruction. As a form, like when they went out there and they occupied that refuge and they said that they were there to return the land to the rightful owners, right? There's an aspect of that I couldn't help seeing, also with the help of the perspective of the Burns Paiute tribe, which saw it this way immediately, as a kind of Wild West show and a kind of reenactment of settlement, of violent settlement of the West. It's not how those people saw it. Or they did, the part of it that they wanted to see was, you know, the heroic homesteader era minus all the horror, right? So they're restaging this basically claiming of the land to distribute it to the people and make everyone free, the whole frontier myth. But they're doing it in this both messianic way, full of all this religious content, and they're doing it as a, you know, live streaming it on Facebook, right? So you have like both and they're also talking in all these registers of our present, in all this very familiar conservative and reactionary talk about overreach and federal tyranny and all this stuff. So the past and the present were mingled together in the kind of images that they were sending out from there. But the past that they were particularly channeling, often with total ignorance, they didn't know that the land had been particularly important native land and is held to be very sacred native land, though in a lot of ways, you know, we're talking about like the center of all the water in a very dry region. It's pretty obvious that would have been the center of all human endeavor for thousands of years. So that history, that particular period that they're reenacting, is in that part of Oregon, really comes to a head with the failure of Reconstruction. In 1876, you have the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, who was a Republican from the Republican Party, but it was one of the most controversial elections that we've ever had. And the compromise that brought him into office basically finally brought Reconstruction to an end, including the removal of federal troops from the South and a reorientation of the country towards sort of a unifying white priority in settlement of the West, including the removal of more troops into the West for pacification, quote unquote. And the immediate result of that was one very famous and one less famous wars against native populations in Oregon that happened to be led by General Howard, who was the head of the Freedmen's Bureau, which was dissolved with the failure of Reconstruction, or before actually, who happened to be the general in charge of displacing the Nez Perce in 1877, the first year of Howard's term. In 1878, they came to the land exactly where the whole Oregon occupation took place and displaced the Paiute people, who then emerged in this story of Edmund Bundy when he claimed that he was taking this land to give it back to the rightful owners. They were the people that had been displaced first by white settlers and then finally by military force, with the change in orientation of the country that came with the end of Reconstruction. At the same time, the Bundys, a lot of the rhetoric of the Bundys, often again unbeknownst to them, bears the mark of that time period. One of their favorite theories is the constitutional sheriff theory, which they tried to work at Bundy Ranch and also in Oregon when they were trying to get the sheriff, which of course he refused, Sheriff Dave Ward of Harney County, to shelter the two ranchers who were at the center of the whole conflama that the occupation bloomed out of, from being returned to federal prison because, according to that milieu, the Bundyite milieu and a lot of the militia milieu, the sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in the land, higher than the Supreme Court. But this idea has a whole history going back to all the way back to Jim Crow, laundered through, or it comes through some of the most vile sort of white supremacist anti-civil rights organizations of the 1960s, the Posse Comitatus, which a lot of these guys don't seem to know it comes from there, but that's where that idea comes from. And the Posse Comitatus is named after the act that ended, the use of military force in the South during Reconstruction. So sorry for that long take, but it just keeps going on.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I should remind people that at one point, Governor LePage of Maine met with some of these sovereign citizens who had this theory that he could contact the sheriffs and have them arrest the lawmakers who were bucking LePage. And there was a big story about how LePage's lawyers waited till they got out of the room and had to basically talk him down and tell him, no, this is all bunk. I mean, it's hilarious and it's also horrific. But all right, so now just to be clear, the Bundyites, were they looking to return this land to the Paiute?
They were not.
Right, but that was the irony.
Yeah, they were not.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And the Paiute were able to intervene in that very adroitly, very quickly, very early on in the occupation. They held a press conference, and the area was saturated with press then, so they got a lot of attendance. And they basically came out and were like, well, that's interesting that they're talking about the rightful owners, and used it as a platform to give their history. I mean, because their history is little known, but
all right. Well, okay.
Pretty big story.
Yes, and that was, I mean, I don't know if there's any dynamic that can show the sort of the nature of, particularly from my experience, the libertarian strand in this type of movements, where the date of the original inhabitants is rather arbitrary. And I would say rather arbitrary is, I think, maybe being generous. It tends to be when the first white person took ownership of something is when property rights essentially start, according to them. But be that as it may, tell us so let's back up. How, I think people remember the Bundy Ranch standoff, but just remind us of that, and then tell us how it ended up. Why did they go to Oregon? Like, how did we end up with, this part of the story?
Well, so 2014 was the showdown at the Bundy Ranch over the federal grazing land of the Bundy family on their ranch in the eastern part of Clark County, Nevada, out in the Mojave Desert. But Clark County is also where Las Vegas is. And that whole story, Las Vegas is actually very involved in it, but that gets forgotten because it goes back over 20 years. And there's a whole issue there with the protection of the desert tortoise, which was declared an endangered species in the early 90s. This caused a problem immediately because Vegas, as it often is, was in a mega growth spurt. And this threatened to halt the growth of Vegas. And so a lot of money was invested in that. And somehow a deal was negotiated that basically the county was able to count these rural desert areas in its eastern extremities as a special desert tortoise protection zone, and that included new BLM, Bureau of Land Management, regulations on the grazing of the ranchers who were out there, which meant they had to move their cattle during, say, the spring green up when the tortoises come out of the holes and eat, and they could run less cattle, and this put a lot of financial pressure on those ranchers. Actually, all of them, except for Cliven Bundy, in the end went out of business. Cliven Bundy came up with another solution. He looked in the Constitution and reading, he's a very devout Latter-day Saint from a very super conservative mindset. So reading the Constitution theologically, as he tends to do, he found a magical clause in there which told him that the federal government had no right to own land. And so he stopped recognizing the federal government's authority in the state of Nevada. And it played out in the court for 20 years. And finally, after back and forth, the BLM came to confiscate his cattle for having been on the land grazing without permission or without him paying his fees. And because Ammon Bundy, his son, who led the standoff in Oregon, in a little kerfuffle with BLM police after his aunt was thrown to the ground by one of them, was himself tased a few times. And then that video went viral in sort of the Patriot militia milieu, and due to some logistical work by a young militiaman from Montana, a disaffected Iraq war veteran who had been trying to organize all these dispersed militia groups to come to, the defense of the people against federal overreach and constitutional, abuses, was able to put out those images, and people came from all over with their guns, and very quickly the BLM decided the situation was too dangerous, and they withdrew. And then 2 years later, that situation was still exactly as it was. Ammon had moved to Boise, Idaho, and a case happening in Harney County came to his attention involving a ranching family that he really identified with.
Why did he move to Idaho? I mean, was it just they were looking for bigger sky or what?
He told me that part of it was they were looking to move. It sounds like, they just wanted to kind of get away from all that conflama. He was living, I think, near Phoenix at that point. He's actually not a rancher, Ammon. He runs a truck fleet maintenance business. And I think he can do that remotely. So they were looking around the West, and he claimed that actually, he and his wife and family came to this place, Emmett, Idaho, outside of Boise. And, everything Ammon does is, guided by the Holy Spirit. So he had a this is the place moment there, and he moved to Idaho. And now he believes that coincidence has to be meaningful because that brought him within 3 hours of Harney County, which is actually otherwise near nowhere. It's the place with the point in the continental United States that's the furthest from the interstate, but he ended up moving within 3 hours of there. And then, he said that he was moved by the Holy Spirit, or in the way that he figures it, to research this Hammond story about this family that was being resentenced due to this case about a long-standing dispute about management of federal grazing lands was being returned to prison, and he felt moved to go there and then begin this whole process of calling these same people who had defended his family in Nevada to come and pressure the sheriff to shelter this Hammond family. When the Hammond family rejected this help and the sheriff, rejected these constitutional sheriff arguments, they took it to another step and occupied the refuge, and then declared that they were first.
Let me ask you this:
returning. Yeah.
Well, two things. First is, and maybe this is just because I like the way that my mind works, and I'm a little bit obnoxious. Did you say to him, how do you justify having a whole business based upon a federal highway system if the guy's doing the trucking? Well, that would have been my first question of him. But I imagine you didn't want to.
Their take on that stuff, when Ammon gets hit with those lines of questioning, which he does a lot, his take is that, there are certain things that the federal government should do.
Okay.
And roads is one of them. The post office is one of them. His father will be like, weights and measures. He likes to do that, weights and measures, that, a pound needs to be a pound in New York and Nevada, so we can do our commerce.
Okay.
So that would be his response to something like that.
But protecting the environment, not one of those things.
Absolutely not. Right. And that definitely where it falls into the political theology of their particular Mormonism. They definitely, for them, this is an earthly sojourn. Human beings aren't from the earth. The earth is here as part of a test, and you have to pass that test. And so the earth itself is here under human dominion to be used as part of that test. So preserving aspects of our earth, not for our use, doesn't make sense to them because the earth is wholly for our use.
Right. Fair enough.
That's also another one of the conflicts of worldview that happened here.
All right. Fair enough. And so let me ask you this. Why did they decide to, in support of the Hammonds, or despite the fact that the Hammonds didn't want their support, and because the sheriff didn't realize his constitutional role, why did they decide? Mm-hmm. Why did they look around? Was it they just basically we need to basically take something back from the federal government to show our power, and they just sort of decided on this refuge because it was sort of the most defensible ground, and they were more, I guess, better trained to deal with that in the woods than to go drive down to, I don't know, to some federal building, Social Security Administration building or something. I mean, why was that basically it?
Well, first of all, I mean, they were doing it within the county. They were also operating, obviously, in a pretty improvisatory way, guided by feelings,
right,
that they saw as religious. But in terms of the strategy, that refuge is really key to that region. It's a marshland out in the desert. So it's also like the source of it's where the water pools, which is obviously incredibly important for any agriculture and also for all animal life. It's the source of life in the region. But I mean, that's not how they were thinking. They were thinking at the refuge in particular and its role. The Hammond family had a lot of conflicts with the refuge earlier on in the 90s. The conflicts they were in trouble for now are with the BLM, but the BLM didn't have that kind of facility. Ammon actually had never been to the refuge before he occupied it. But Ryan Payne, the militia leader who was his kind of partner in this, did go out and check it out and discovered that it had a lot of met a lot of their logistical needs for something like this. They wanted to do a kind of occupation. They were inspired by the Occupy movement, but of course, being like big Second Amendment people, they're going to bring their guns because they thought the idea that you could just get zip tied and taken away from a protest was unacceptable to them. So when and a refuge, because of the amount of the budgetary limitations of so many of our federal agencies, especially when it comes to environmental protection, they rely a lot on volunteers. So they have great bunkhouse facilities for volunteers to come out and do work, which they saw and like, this is a great place to bunk down. Whoever will come out and join us. It was also 30, 40 miles from town, so outside of town, but also readily, it allowed them, it worked as a guerrilla base, it allowed them to move from there into town to do propaganda and then shelter at night out there. So they were, far out of town. It had there's a big fire tower that could see who was coming, but also it just provided a lot of facilities for them to host people. And it was January, so it was winter, and that was really important. It's very cold there.
Okay, and that was important insofar as strategically it was easier for them because who's going to camp out and wait us out type of thing.
Yeah, and also for like getting people to come if they weren't going to be cold.
Right.
And then the other thing is that they knew that county. That county is the size of Massachusetts and it has 7,000 people in it, and there's 4 deputies in the county at that time. So they also knew that whatever they're going to do, they're going to do there, because the amount of people that they could bring just through their horizontal, Facebook platforms.
They could get 1% of the people in that county, basically 70 people they could have up there, essentially. Okay.
And they could immediately challenge the federal sovereignty and local sovereignty in the region, just like that. And they did. Yeah.
So basically, I mean, what happens while they're up there? I remember watching the videos. I mean, they were live streaming this on Facebook, I guess it was, or maybe it was on Twitter. I can't remember. I remember people were sending
Facebook and YouTube. They use it.
People were sending them all sorts of sex paraphernalia in the guise of being supplies, just to watch them having to pull out. Like a big dildo, and that was
snacks.
Yeah, that was funny. I mean, so what? Social media obviously plays a huge role for them because they're able to sort of contact people and find their supporters across the country. What else happens up there that implicates the story later? I mean, obviously, there's one casualty which happened at the end of the standoff, basically. In some respects, marked it, Lavoy Finicum. But what happened during there that ends up really implicating stuff later?
In terms of the trials, or in terms of just how this story resonates?
Yeah, I would say
forward
resonates. I mean,
situation.
obviously the trial, narrowly, things narrowly implicated in the context of the trial. But I'm saying, were there any things that happened there? Because obviously, Eamon Bundy has recanted, I guess. But was there stuff that happened there that changed their perspective, or was it all the sort of the fallout that did?
I wouldn't say Eamon has recanted his federal land stance is exactly the same, but he has renounced. He never was really a militia person, and he's renounced a certain sector of that patriot movement that has gone whole hog for Trump, and particularly in relation to the rhetoric around immigrants and refugees, which Ammon doesn't support. He's a super Mormon libertarian, and so his views on borders are not the views of nativist Trumpites. And also he sees a lot of the sort of rhetoric coming from like Trumpite militia people as being, I mean, he called it fascist. So that's the source of that break. He also learned a lot in prison, I think, he was in a private prison for a long time. I think that changed some of his perspectives. By the time he got out of there or from that prison, he was advocating for the abolition of the prison system, which is not something people were expecting.
Right.
And the replacement of it with a system of like restitution and reconciliation, which I don't know if he's done anything about that since he's gotten out of prison. But in terms of what happened out there, I mean, it became the whole thing. It was like, it was so tense, and yet also for a long time, nothing was happening. They had a press conference every day, right? They staged media events. They were pretty good at doing that. They cut a fence line to show that they were, fighting federal tyranny. They had the whole issue with the artifacts of the tribe that turned into a big issue right towards the end that Lavoy Finicum, who was one of their leadership, who was the one casualty of the occupation, got very involved in, tried to use as a method to bring the tribe into the occupation in some kind of alliance, which is unsurprisingly did not work, especially since to the tribe the idea of even handling the artifacts that were stored on the refuge and that were at the center of Finicum's reach outs to the tribe was both an offense and also a dangerous thing to do. You just don't touch things and mess with things that are that were handled or made by the dead.
In terms of just luck, right?
In terms of luck, or you're basically messing with the energy of the person who made that thing, is the idea, basically, to put it too simplistically, really. But an element, basically, of their power stays with the thing they made, and if you mess with that, it sets up a bad relationship with other aspects of that person. I mean, it's going to mess with your health. Yeah.
And malheur actually means bad luck, essentially, in French, yes?
It means bad luck or misfortune, which none of the Bundyites seemed to know. It seems like I was often the person informing them that was the name of the place.
Wow.
They'd occupied another thing that they didn't know about. And then there was also the role of the militia people who didn't join Ammon, who felt that he'd hijacked their thing with their rally for the Hammonds on January 2nd, but also wanted to play an important role. At one point, even coming out in full tactical gear to hijack Ammon's press conference and surround themselves with guys with long guns and actually say, we're playing a very significant role, though what the role they were playing was never exactly clear. Though that created some of the most famous images of the occupation are of these militia guys who weren't part of the occupation guarding their leaders out there saying, we're playing a very significant role. So there's a lot of comic moments like that, including with all the snacks and video misses from out there. And also, like, the tension in the county, though, began to build. And there's a lot of concern that it was going to explode into something pretty horrible and violent.
Did they have support in the context of the county? I mean, did they have measurable support anywhere?
They had support there, but not of the degree they believed. But they definitely had support. People were coming out there and bringing them food every day. And they were getting more attention. I don't think they didn't seem to be getting support from the established ranching community at all, but maybe from smaller ranchers who don't have as much access to federal land. And also from folks in town. It's a really depressed area. It used to be the wealthiest per capita income county in Oregon. Now it's by far the poorest, mainly due to like changes in how the forest is being used there, which is also the northern part of the county is pine forest. So they got some traction with, people, disaffected people there, but it never seems to have been anywhere near half the county. Ammon believed it was everybody, or that everybody who was against him worked for the federal government. That does not seem to have been true, but it was definitely dividing the county, and there was starting to be fear that, it's also a very heavily armed area.
So
everybody's armed out there. So there was fear that could, who knows what would happen if people started shooting at each other. I mean, beyond just even the federal government going in and arresting them, is that at that point the FBI was just playing a waiting game, waiting for them to be in a position where they could,
Right.
take out the leadership, which is what they did.
All right. So looking back on all of this, like, where does this fit in? I mean, are we looking at a phenomena that has never left us, or one that is resurgent, or what? Like, I mean, this disposition towards the federal government, it seems to me, is something that just continually raises its head in one form or another. And largely, and I guess the story with these guys is it's sort of almost unbeknownst to them as to what the roots of this are, right? Like all of the legal precepts that they're basing their views on, that the sheriff is the key element, the most powerful, I guess, law enforcement or government official that exists, is something that grew out of a theory that basically grew out of, I would imagine, on some level, like chasing down runaway slaves, or chasing, some measure of relationship to maintaining slavery or the vestiges of slavery. Contextualize this phenomena for us, and what does it say about the era we're living in?
Well, again, I think that we see it in what I really saw in the occupation itself, right, is it made this figure, this complex image of our now, I would call it, thinking of like the now as being like where the past and the present combine to form an intertwined picture, right? And certainly that occupation, again, in the way that they were seeking their way out of, actual economic and social malaise in the West, through this reenactment of, the heyday of the second wave of manifest destiny and settlement, which is also the Jim Crow era, and the era of the end of Reconstruction, and the era of the doubling down on white supremacy and Western settlement, is something that speaks to American history across the decades since the 19th century. Periodically, whenever you have a push towards more movements of social liberation, you get this kind of backlash, right? That has to locate itself in some kind of historical period. There's a lot of how they talk, as extreme as they seem. There's a lot of how they talk that just reminded me of everything that came out of Ronald Reagan's mouth growing up.
Right.
A lot of it. Ronald Reagan talked openly about government assistance programs as being the federal plantation. Remember that rhetoric that people still use, right? That's all coded in. That's just pure Jim Crow rhetoric, right? And it's still circulating in so much of our political discourse, often poorly understood by the people who are using it, but not poorly understood by people who are hearing it, and that makes so impossible so many conversations, including ones that maybe, could be very useful to have. I don't think it's possible to have conversations about different kinds of intertwined sovereignty and, say, land management involving local, state, and federal sovereignty if people coming in with this anti-federal rhetoric are just channeling all this horrible history without knowing it. How do you have a conversation when that history is not being acknowledged, when your states' rights rhetoric is Confederate rhetoric? And
so I think
that just leads to the whole.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but I guess I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of states' rights, right? I mean, just to use a sort of the broadest sort of measure of this, was almost exclusively developed, and to the extent that it was used in other, let's say, forums or in regards to other issues, was simply to further edify the idea that you can't come in, federal government, and tell us how to treat our black people. Is basically, right, what our slaves or are now freed slaves. I mean, it was. I imagine, early on there was a notion, maybe when we're talking about the 13 colonies of like, hey, it's not fair that you get resources that we don't, or that or you want some of the value that we get because we have crabbing, we have access to, like whatever. Like I imagine there was
or seaports or stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There was an era where sort of for the states, the geography created certain value that they wanted to make sure they weren't having to give up because maybe there was some, difficulty associated with it. Like, it was hard to build these docks, or perhaps there is, well, we've been founded by a group of people and we don't want, we want polygamy, or whatever it is. But what's left? I mean, what's left today in this era for those type of arguments if you strip out the sort of the coding there? Like, honestly, what does Rhode Island want with its sovereignty because of what's going on in Massachusetts?
Well, I think that, first of all, the states' rights rhetoric is, the legacy that you're mapping there seems absolutely true to me, and that's what makes it, as a position, one that's not an argument that goes anywhere but to a standoff, right?
But where do they?
At the same time, I think it's also part of.
What do they believe? Like if they, when you told them, hey guys, do you realize this was just about slavery, and they go, oh my gosh, had no idea. Darn.
Well, they say that it's not, that it's about federal tyranny, blah, 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 right? And that's about, they go into an argument that local people know, that, the ones who are the most articulate would go into an argument about how local people know how best to manage their affairs, and, bureaucrats in Washington shouldn't be managing it, blah, 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 the usual kind of Reagan stuff, right? And I think that where those arguments have legitimacy are about, local versus big power structures, right? That, having local people involved in the decisions that, affect them makes sense, right?
Yes.
And federal structures that make innovative room for local people to kind of direct the operations in collaboration, as actually it has been going on in Harney County, unbeknownst to the occupiers at the refuge, who wouldn't know anything about that because none of them were from there or knew anything about the place, have been going on for about 15 years with local people basically getting to operate federal sovereignty collaboratively by consensus in terms of new policies putting down on federal land. That kind of stuff, that kind of conversation seems super legitimate to me. But how do you get to a place where you can have a conversation that's just about those practical things, about land management and about different relationships to the land and about coming to some agreement, when you have this rhetoric that's full of this horrible history that's being denied? I think it's incredibly difficult, and nothing happens partly because of that horrible history. But, it's also, of course, it's been mobilized super cynically by the corporate libertarian right. As part of it's they don't mean for states to actually be more powerful. They like states because states are weak, and they like localities, local governments local governments are weak.
That's the amazing thing about
this. It's all bullshit. Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about this is anybody who's lived in a small locality knows that the corruption there is far more naked in many respects than it is in a more bureaucratic state. A, and then B, the whole point, theoretically, if you genuinely buy into this notion, which I think is legitimate, you want people on the ground to understand the unique circumstances that exist in a community so that any type of federal law or assistance or whatever can be changed. There's flexibility to meet the needs of that area. But how do you establish a principle beyond that? The idea that you could come into a non-place where you're not a local and offer anything in that context other than you should work with the feds is ridiculous. It undercuts the exact point, right? I mean, it's almost.
Oh, yeah.
It's I don't know. It's almost. There's a quality of education reform and educator in this argument that I think is legit, but then you sort of step out of hey, wait a second. The whole point is they know this area, you don't. So beyond saying that there should be some type of partnership, you've got nothing to offer these people.
Well, I mean, that blatant hypocrisy drove people in Harney County bananas, as you can imagine. Like, you guys don't know anything. You're coming in here to represent us. A lot of the talk of people in the county is like, you don't speak for us. You don't know anything. You don't have a clue. Get out of here. And, the irony of that was really obvious. And also, I think you see in that, too, I mean, to go back to where we started with Teresa's quote about Jason, you see, like, the violence of abstractions and of living by abstractions that give you good feelings, right? So they come with these abstract ideas about localism to impose them on a locality that they don't know, because it makes them feel like their lives are full of meaning and purpose, right? They're saving America. And we see in that the violence of that underlies that kind of pure abstract thinking, right? And the absurdity of it.
That is,
and I think that.
Go ahead.
And then that's all happening within this larger context of so many of our public institutions and public lives, public spaces and public spheres, and things like unions, and being eviscerated and replaced with these privatized public spheres of the internet, which obviously also, like, this whole thing wouldn't have happened without Ammon being able to organize this flock of fleeting sovereignty, right, to come impose its abstractions on this place. Wouldn't have happened without all those social changes and different forms of privatization.
I think
that have undermined all levels of power.
Yeah, I think that that dynamic of abstractions being dangerous and then particularly hypocritical when that abstraction is that local über alles, and you're not from that area, misses the point. But it's a fascinating story. Shadowlands, Fear and Freedom at the Oregon Standoff. Anthony McCann, we will put a link to your book at majority.fm. It is available tomorrow everywhere. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the time, and thanks for the attention, and thanks for the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right, folks. Fascinating stuff. Yeah. And this notion of, like, how much of, like, on the various things that we talk about on any given day deal with people who have essentially inherited these abstractions without any sense of the historical context from which they came, which gave them birth and meaning. And like I've found just across the board, even in stuff that is non-political, like the idea of, like, people just thinking that there is nothing to symbolism or nothing inherent in ideas or images or whatnot. And the problem is that if everybody was completely ignorant, then maybe it would just be a bad idea, right? But the problem is that there's the same idea, which I have said on this program, and I think now there's data that shows this in terms of, like, protests and whatnot. All you need is about 5 to 15% of any given population to make change. And to cause problems, obviously the number goes smaller. And so when you have people who adopt rhetoric and they don't understand what the foundations of that rhetoric are, understand there are people who do know what that rhetoric means. They do know what the lineage comes from, and they build upon that. I mean, that's, on some level, that is a story that's happening in Portland this past weekend, right? Where there was clashes between some of the patriot, some Proud Boys and that ilk, and Antifa folks, and obviously most of the media attention has been some people who were engaged in black box tactics, attacking this guy who writes for Quillette. And frankly, I'd never heard of the guy. I haven't seen enough footage or reporting on this, like what was the basis of this. The right would have you believe that Antifa was attacking journalists. But as far as I could tell, there was a ton of journalists around watching that attack. Now, I don't think that that guy looked a lot more beat up than he should have. I don't think I certainly don't condone violence, not in that context. People milkshake. They shouldn't, and I think you can get ticketed for that. And I mean actual milkshakes. There's some question that I think there was an attempt to
Posobiec's been stirring some stuff about cement.
Supposedly there's cement in it. Now, my experience with cement is not quite like that. You would be able to get away with that, but
there's been some skepticism expressed. Let's say.
Yeah,
that.
I reminded all of my Antifa super soldiers not to drink the wrong milkshake by mistake.
There you go.
It's going to be murder on your insides.
But the bottom line is, like, there's a lot of people out there who are just sort of hanging on to sort of outer concentric circles of ideas that are founded and are structured on really, really bad and oppressive ideas. And they may or may not know it, and they may or may not know that they're helping promote these ideas, right? I mean, and you see it. We'll talk about, I interviewed Caleb Kane again and did a longer interview with him. And he's that kid who sort of fell into that wormhole. It started with Stefan Molyneux. And then by the time he started climbing out of it, he was, I can't remember what he called it, a race realist or something to that effect. And which is, I guess, like white supremacist adjacent. And
he's a white nationalist.
And you start to climb down a hole, and it leads you there because once you accept one premise, I mean, this is the case with anything, right? I mean, both positive and negative. If I can somehow find that I could actually jog 1 mile, then maybe it's possible I could jog 2 miles. Like the point is that human beings constantly are recreating baselines for themselves. And if you get yourself to the point where it's like, hey, just the reality is that race, you have IQ distinctions between race, and IQ actually means something beyond how you do on the IQ test. Then the next step is easier to take, and the next step is easier to take. And that's the whole danger of these ideas. I mean, we see this. We see people take down, buildings. Now, these ideas are also obviously a function, and they're generated within contexts, historical and material contexts. And some of the people are subject to these contexts, and some of them are just like receiving the ideas and passing them on. And then when they run into people who are in the right context and into the right political scenarios, that's when these ideas get really problematic. Right? I mean, if Eamon Bundy's just sitting in his house and not doing anything about it, just talking about the ideas, fine. But they float around, they hit the right person who is within a certain context that makes it problematic, and that's when you start having problems.
Yeah, Marx famously hated ideology and never referred to himself as a Marxist, even though Marxism is arguably not an ideology in and of itself. It is a framework for understanding capitalism.
Well, Marx and I share that same thing.
Hi, Marx. Hello.
But he had the advantage of just saying that, like, I'm Marx, and people just assume he drops the ists.
Yeah.
He actually, we talked about this, he endorsed this labor-right program in France, which is interesting because everybody always talks about the critique of the Gotha program, which is basically his version of saying something analogous to social democracy will be insufficient in a capitalist context. But then conversely, he embraced this French Worker Party and said, and the program he outlined at that time was all like equalize wages, 8-hour day, empower labor unions, total social democratic program. And he said, basically the people who opposed him in doing this, I would not, don't attach yourselves to my name because you're idiots.
There you go. In other words, he had a concept of the dumb left before.
Honestly, I don't want to take it there, but that was pretty much what he was talking about.
You should read what he said about Bakunin.
Dumb left.
Yeah.
All right. Just a reminder. This this program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, folks, you support this program for just pennies a day. And we give you, in return, extra content virtually every day. Virtually every day. Almost every day that we do the show. This week, we're going to be off on July 4th. And then we're going to have a shortened show on Friday that will be pre-recorded, I believe. Because everybody goes out and barbecues except for me, apparently. And
I'll be on Twitter.
Monitoring things.
You're wrong.
You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And it's always free shipping. So check that out. And when you get when you become a member, we also cut out the ads. So if you want to know, like how, for instance, you get today's special New Yorker deal, and you're a member, you just look in your member feeds podcast description, and you will see the deals. So you get the deals without the chitty chat. So become a member today. Jointhemajorityreport.com. We have one more thing. We have a big announcement to make in the next week. And I sort of spilt the beans on that startup podcast with Destiny and Dan. We're rolling out something new.
Oh, this is great.
I think this
has literally been something that you've been wanting to do for
something
years.
I wanted to do for a long time because I've always it's something that I wanted to hear.
Right.
And I just assume that everybody else does too. But they probably, I don't know. Maybe everybody else does. Maybe they won't. But we'll give you more details in the next couple of days. But stay tuned. Today is Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Tuesday is the Michael Brooks Show day. If you're not aware of that, Michael, what is going to be on it?
Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about reclaiming the future, organizing for a post-capitalist world, and the Joe Biden time warp with Malaika Jabali and in the commentary. And then the Anthony Fontano, who have been buddies with for a while online, host of the Needle Drop, is going to join us. And we're going to talk about our... he might interrogate my.
We were going to have him on the Majority Report.
You're going to have him on,
huh?
Cool.
I was going to have him on the Antifada.
I just got him scooped.
No scarcity, guys. Think be like Andrew Yang.
There's enough of him to go around.
Like everybody can have time with the Needle Drop on all the podcast platforms. Unless you have food stamps.
Unless you have food stamps, then you can't speak to him, or you'll choose whether you talk to him or you feed yourself. So anyways, we're going to be talking about reggae and 90s hip-hop till today. We're also both followed by the @Lula official account, so we might talk about that a little bit. Looking forward to it. 7 o'clock on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel, patreon.com/TMBS.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, in our free episode from Wednesday, we had a wide-ranging conversation with Chad Vigorous, a.k.a. Pretty Bad Lefty, from Twitter.com, about white people music, race, socialism, class, and more. And in our bonus episode that dropped for our patrons on Friday, we interrogate Chad Vigorous's somewhat hot take that he would rather have communism with some racism than perfectly woke diversity capitalism. So check it out.
It's a very Chad Vigorous take.
Indeed. It's also it's just a good problematic, shall we say. Also, this week we're running Prolit Cult as our main episode on Wednesday. So if you're interested in hearing AP Andy talk about the new season of Black Mirror, as well as UFOs, the paranormal, the parasocial, and the parapolitical, check it out. Also, just a little note about me. I'm going away to commie camp tomorrow, so I will not be here for the rest of the week. It's in an undisclosed location in the Pacific Northwest.
Charge.
Hopefully I don't run into any Bundy types when I'm there.
There you go.
Do you remember that guy who challenged Chris Christie to a sumo wrestling match? Do you remember that?
Sumo wrestling?
He was at the Bundy Ranch. He was one of the occupiers, and he got literally into a diaper and challenged Chris Christie to a sumo wrestling match. And I was reminded of how this movement fit into all of the great political movements of our history.
Apparently, speaking of Joe Biden, we were just talking, Jesse Jackson just basically went on and said he's been on the wrong side of history in terms of civil rights. I can't help.
You mean on the same day that Simone Sanders said that he was modeling his idea after the Rainbow Coalition, Jesse Jackson said it was the opposite of that?
It appears Simone Sanders is regularly a little bit behind the rest of other parts of the Biden campaign.
Cycle like her. She is like always a couple of. I'm starting to wonder if Simone Sanders is still committed to the Bernie Sanders revolution.
Literary hangover. Check out the most recent episode on Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Blithedale Romance, where he makes fun of the utopian socialists, sort of pre-Marx socialists of America that he was kind of a part of. And then later this week, I'm recording with my co-host Chris, Rutger Bregman's Utopia for Realists. We're going to talk about UBI. We'll probably talk about a lot about Yang Gang there too, and his work week and some of his other proposals. But basically, it's going to be a UBI thing. Is UBI a Trojan horse, or is it a universal strike fund? We're going to get to the bottom of it once and for all.
Bregman came out. It was in favor of a UBI, but not as an either or.
I think he has a more left UBI. Yeah,
he's an enhancement, not a cut.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we need.
He's
to
a
just
genuine
come up
liberal leftist.
We need to come up with some shorthand for describing like UBI as an add-on or add or subtraction UBI, basically.
Left UBI, right UBI.
That's how I think about it.
Sacrilege. All right, folks. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Thank you. Sam will be with you shortly.
That was actually, I was the voice model for that. Then, no, I don't. Forget it. Just forget it. I had to drive a mile out of camp. It was like a 5-hour, 6-hour endeavor yesterday. I still have not quite recovered, so I'm bringing my A game, folks, for most of it.
Is Milo going to commie camp too?
No, just YMCA camp.
It's kind of commie.
It's not. I wouldn't. No, I don't know. They don't. I don't get the sense there's a lot of political ideology there. I try.
They say it's fun to stay there.
But okay, so let's just go over some of the debate stuff. We should say, do we have that image? Here is what we got out of the debate. Not terribly surprising. I mean, I think this is consistent with what we were saying. I thought, frankly, that Pete Buttigieg had done a little bit better than this, but it does not. Maybe people saw he was a little sweaty.
He's
Alfred
robotic.
Newman.
I mean, whatever the word is that people use to describe like an empty suit.
Now, this is a YouGov poll, and I don't know if they're considered to be as good as the Morning Consult. But the Morning Consult, my understanding is, had Biden dropping 5 or 10 points in the poll. That's a big difference, but I'm pretty sure here that Joe Biden, this is, let's see, Politico is saying, Politico is saying that Harris was raising record sums of money for her campaign following debates. Warren drew one of her largest crowds yet. Harris announced Saturday she had raised $2 million for more than 63,000 people in the 24 hours following her debate, her best single fundraising day of the campaign. She shot up 6 percentage points in the Morning Consult poll, tying Warren at 12%. Biden and Sanders camp uneasy, according to Politico. And this Morning Consult, Joe Biden lost 5 points in the first post-debate survey. Still leads with 33%. Sanders had a slight drop in favorability, but not necessarily in his polling. Here is some more of the electability. And again, this is really problematic for Biden. For everybody else, there's room for them to make the case and whatnot and to attract voters because I think they're electable, but I love their policies. Electability obviously goes into everybody's perspective in a primary. The problem is if it's all electability, come time for the general, it's hard to find volunteers, right? In part because if there's no delta between them getting elected and their electability, you feel like, well, what do I have to do? I chose the electable one. Definitionally, they're electable. I don't have to do anything. I think that certainly hurt Hillary Clinton, without a doubt. It also was compounded by the fact that everybody, including this program, was saying Donald Trump has, anywhere from 85 to 99% chance of losing. It just turns out that even if it's 99%, 1 in 100 comes up, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 100 times before that one comes up.
I was surprised myself.
So here are the electabilities. Joe Biden dropped 13 points in the perception that he's electable in the general election. Now, he's still ahead. But again, my theory is that as that drops, the rate in which it drops is going to increase. What do they call that? Velocity, right?
Velocity.
The velocity of the non-electability.
Or the rate of decrease.
Elizabeth Warren, she gained 11 points in electability. And that for her is well, not only is that a big number to jump, but again, I think there's a lot of people out there who are supportive of Warren, but are not sure that she can win. And as more people get convinced that she win, it has, I don't think, quite the same velocity effect as Joe Biden's fall. But
those percentage points are just like candy from a piñata.
Indeed. Kamala Harris up by 10%. Bernie Sanders, more or less the same.
Slow and steady.
In terms of electability. I guess 1 point, but that's well within the margin of error. So that's just noise. Cory Booker jumped a couple of points. Again, not big enough necessarily to say it's outside the margin of error. Pete Buttigieg dropped 2 points. Again, margin of error. But Julian Castro went from 9 to 21%. That's a pretty significant jump.
That's a real jump. That is a real jump.
Amy Klobuchar went up by 3 points only because people probably didn't even know she was in the race.
That must be just pure. Although, did Gillibrand get the same?
Gillibrand got 2 points.
Okay, so Gillibrand and Klobuchar.
It's also within
exposure,
the same. Yeah. But the big story is basically the two of the three Bs. Actually, all three Bs went down. They were the only ones who went down.
Not Beto.
Beto dropped.
I'll give myself an A.
He's going to be so sad, though.
Well, here's the sad part.
I think I did well.
The sad part is he can't even say like he gets an A in terms of drop because his was only 12 points and Joe Biden's was 13%. So he's really came in.
How are we defining drop here?
I came in second.
Amongst those who dropped. And that is why I am so excited to keep making a total ass of myself and burning up the money you're giving me like lighting a cigar or a spliff with $100 bill.
I hope he doesn't post any sad videos.
I bet you he drops out if he's in another debate with Julian Castro.
There you go.
He really should.
Well, you know what it turns out?
He should drop out.
Julian Castro does not speak Spanish. Oh, really? He does not speak Spanish. His Spanish apparently is actually piss poor. I mean, he's trying to bone up, but he does not speak Spanish. He's not. It's not a first language. Let's put it that way, or second language, rather, I should say. So there it is. I mean, look. I try not to spend too much time on the horse race stuff, but we have talked about these policies ad nauseum, and we'll talk more about them as we go on, as they're introduced. At this point in the race in 2008, if I remember correctly, all three, or maybe at least two of them, Edwards and maybe Obama, maybe Clinton didn't come out with hers until later, had released fully articulated plans. Now, Bernie Sanders has put legislation in. Others have offered legislation and have signed on to different legislations. But as candidates, putting out a plan really locks you into very specific things. And none of them have done that up to this point. There have been other plans that have been put out that have been very specific. Things like the college debt proposals or the free college, et cetera, et cetera. Criminal justice reform. So we will get to that when we get to that. One of the things that came out of the debate that I think was a big deal for people on the left was to see Elizabeth Warren raise her hand when it's, would you be comfortable signing on to a Medicare for all and abolishing private insurance? Now, it has been my position that the idea of abolishing private insurance, I think that question is even loaded. The idea is you want a program that everybody has to sign up for and participate in because you want to have the biggest risk pool possible. So everybody pays their premiums. You can call them premiums. The premiums are going to be less than most people pay for private insurance. We're going to call them taxes. And the benefit of this program is that not only are your premiums going to be lower, or taxes, special Medicare for all taxes, but at the point of service, it's not going to cost you anything. And you're not going to deal with out of network, in network. Everybody's going to be in network.
But I love spending time on my insurance company's website.
I can't even tell you.
What are you, Ezra Klein?
What it's like. Wait till Ezra Klein has 2 kids. And he's got to deal with all the crap that comes with like all the different things.
Oh, it's even more interesting now. I have kids to take care of.
Yes, it's honestly like a legit part-time job.
I think that it's such the sales job of making it that like government bureaucracy is somehow an evil, but it's fun to deal with corporate bureaucracy is one of the greatest scams that have ever been pulled.
Couldn't agree more. And I think you could say the same thing about fraud and everything else, and corruption and overpaying and all that. But because that's just institutions. But so Elizabeth Warren raised her hand. So did Kamala Harris. But apparently, when Kamala Harris did it, here's that moment. Now, I want you to listen to Lester Holt carefully, because Kamala Harris has walked back her holding her hand up, and it's, I think, for maybe, I don't know. You decide. Listen to Lester Holt carefully, to the words he uses, and he's directing it to the candidates.
You know, we're going to do it again now. Many people watching at home have health insurance of their employer. Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan? Yeah. All right. Christian Gillibrand.
Now pause it. Who here would abolish their private insurance in favor of a government plan? I'm asking you guys. Who here would abolish their private insurance in favor of a government healthcare plan?
My hand is raised.
Everybody raised their hand, of course. But what if the there, which we all assumed at that moment, applied to the premise of his question? I don't know. It's confusing. And certainly, apparently, Kamala Harris was confused.
Senator, another defining moment in the debate was when every candidate was asked to raise their hand if they would abolish private insurance. In that moment, you raised your hand. But afterwards, your campaign says, actually, that's not your position. So what is your position on private insurance?
So the question was, would you be willing to give up your private insurance?
That's not how it was asked.
For such a plan. And
that's what you heard, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's certainly what I heard. And in terms of, I am supportive of Medicare for all, and under a Medicare for all policy, private insurance would certainly exist, and for supplemental coverage. But under Medicare for all, and my vision of it, we would actually extend benefits. So, for example, vision care, dental care, hearing aids, which currently are not covered, and anyone you know who's a senior can tell you they're extremely expensive, and people have to come out of pocket to pay for them. Included in my perspective on the issue of private insurance is this, and I told the story last night. Look, any night in America, there is some parent who's got a child who has a fever that's out of control and going to the emergency room to get help at the middle of the night, and then looking at those sliding glass doors as they're in their car in the parking lot, concerned that if they walk through those sliding glass doors, they're going to be out of pocket $5,000 because of the deductible. They've got insurance.
All right,
but they will be
Senator
out of pocket $5,000.
We're going to have to leave it there.
So, 91%, and I'll just add 91% of the doctors in America today are in Medicare.
All right. So there you have it. And I personally, the way that she articulated her plan, I think is good. I think the idea of abolishing of private insurance is it's just not helpful and necessary. The idea is that everybody has to belong, and I'm quite convinced that the reason why the question is asked in that manner is basically a red herring.
I think that's true. I just think the bigger thing they have to ask with somebody like Kamala Harris is honestly whether or not she will be actually committed to following through on this should she be in the position. I think that's the bigger question.
She's going to lie just in the same way that she would. I mean, she just said what she supported. If you say, like, are you serious about it, though?
No, I'm not talking about I'm talking about looking up her record, her previous policy positions, campaign donors, the obvious stuff you have to do.
Whether you trust it.
Right, that's my point.
It's just a weird way to phrase that question, right? To say who would abolish their health insurance. Like, you don't abolish something that belongs only to you, right? Like, wow, I really abolished that egg and cheese sandwich earlier. Like, it's a word you use for stuff on a policy level. So even before you get to the red herring of abolishing private health insurance in general, which is another, I agree with you, it's a bad way to frame it, and they're doing it on purpose. Like, the word there makes it really weird.
I mean, the simple point is it's not about making private insurance abolish, it's about making it irrelevant.
Do you support creating a single pool of national insurance for every single person in the United States?
So, but there it is. I mean, whether she's genuinely committed to that idea of single payer health insurance is another question. But at least the idea of abolishing insurance is just, I don't know. I wouldn't even say that either. Would you just make insurance illegal? Like, abolish it doesn't make any sense. Nobody would abolish. You would never say, like, I'm going to abolish private insurance except for supplemental. You're not abolishing anything. You're just basically saying we're going to limit it.
You don't abolish, like, footpaths because you're building interstates.
It's just weird. But that's the way that they wanted to frame it. Frankly, if everybody pays into the system and doctors must respect the system, if they want to work within certain parameters. Harris said right there, 91% take Medicare. It's a smaller number that take Medicaid. And really, this Medicare for All program is really closer to a Medicaid for All, but expanded. But I will tell you this. I know people in Medicaid. And if they have access to doctors, which is big if, but it tends to be in bigger cities you do, they love it. They love it. The question is, do you get access to doctors? And that is something that we can do by regulation. Another question that people have, and they've been asking this quite a bit, and intuitively, I think I've known this, but I've done some research on it. What's going to happen to all these jobs? There's 500,000 people who work in the insurance industry, the private insurance industry, as adjusters, as all of it. The vast majority of them will find a job in the expanded Medicare bureaucracy. It's not like these people who are doing these jobs to implement private insurance are making off like bandits. That's not where the skimming is happening. The skimming is happening with the billions of dollars of profits that go into the hands of CEOs, board of directors, and other shareholders. That's the part that's going to get lopped off. There will be a fairly sizable group of people, maybe big enough to fit into like a Marriott conference hall, who are executives of medical insurance companies who will be out of work. But as you know, they make the big bucks for a reason. So I'm sure they will find new work.
Well, they can always, build some infrastructure as part of our federal jobs guarantee.
There you go.
They can be part of the next industries we have to quasi-abolish.
The vast majority of people who work in the insurance industry, because as it works now, private insurance companies are contracted by the government, not just for Medicare Advantage, to implement Medicaid. And so you could easily do that. It's just they would not be companies that set the parameters. They would be like almost like permanent temp companies, but with benefits and whatnot. They are just coming in and they're executing the program. But the program itself would be government run. The funding for it would be government run. So the massive job losses that would happen there are really another red herring. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
What's happening, Bro Flamingo?
How you doing today, Sam?
Good. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. I just want to give a quick shout out to Mike and Brendan. Funny story real quick. You guys did that kind of segment riffing on Chuck Todd, and you guys ripped on him during the Democratic debates. But I distinctly remember when I just kind of transitioned mostly off of cable news, he was the first guy to go because he's just the worst. You know, Chuck Todd is really just one of the worst, like the epitome of like kind of mainstream media mediocrity, and he has a strange adherence to like the media center. It's just really, really strange. I hate that guy. Anyways,
You needed about 5.
Wait, hold on. I'll give you 1 second. I'm sorry about that.
Any given population.
No, I just wanted to bring up the Democratic debates real quick, just from my perspective. I felt like the one area where I disagree with you, Sam, I don't think Buttigieg did himself any favors. In fact, where I agree with you is that he's playing with the house money at this point because he really shouldn't be there. But he also has no black support, in my opinion. And you know, he also has a race problem. That's completely my opinion. And he didn't do himself any favors. He's smooth, but I don't think he did any. I don't think he did himself any favors in the Democratic debates. Also, Swalwell clipped him. Actually, Hickenlooper kind of clipped him too. I was like, why didn't you do anything while you were the mayor? I don't think he'll get that far.
Well, I think I will say this. Certainly, I think that's what Michael's perspective was, and I think others in the office. And the polling certainly doesn't show that he got any benefit out of it. If anything, he got a little bit less. And then I also saw some thing where some millennials, I don't know where I saw this, but said that like they thought Swalwell out millennialed him. And I was like,
well, Swalwell's more. It's funny. They're the same age, right? Are they the same age?
I'll get into Michael.
Buttigieg feels more ex.
Pete Buttigieg. I'm sorry, guys. I just want to say that again. Credit to Michael on this one. He just kind of said he's a West Wing character, just with a race problem. And I'm saying with the race problem. As a matter of fact, if Bernie wants to win, okay, this is my opinion, guys. If Bernie wants to win, you attack these guys on race, simply because they're all terrible on race relations, specifically with black people. I'm talking about Biden and 94 crime bill. That's the next thing that should be in the clip when going at Joe Biden. Same thing for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, look, I mean, she was effective during the Democratic debates, but she has her own problems with locking black people up.
Well, didn't Bernie vote for that same crime bill though too?
No. And I was going to say, Bernie should be the first one to be like, hey, look, I apologize for it. I apologize. I messed up.
He also spoke out against it at the time.
There's clips of him, in fact, already doing that. I mean, there's a very effective one from a couple of weeks ago where he, and it was an easy contrast because Biden, of course, said he was still proud of the bill, and Bernie said, look, none of us should be proud of that bill. And then he explained the political realities of the time and of course, let's also be real that if he voted against it, then it would just be blaring at him 24/7 that he voted against the Violence Against Women Act. But I mean, he's the only one who has the credibility of, at the very least, recognizing the problems at the time. And I think it is important in general to really historically contextualize. I mean, that bill was supported by everybody.
Well, no, but my point is you can't criticize Biden.
Yeah, you can.
For doing it when you did it too.
I think
yes, you can. Wait,
of course you can. He wrote it.
Real quick, guys.
Wait.
I just want to say this exactly to Michael's point, exactly, because Biden owned this bill. Everybody has some latitude to run away from this bill. Biden bragged about the fact that he authored the bill. They're saying, so you could just nail this to him. And by the way, he refused to apologize for it. So therefore, he wants to die by the. He wants to live by the sword, die by the sword. And one more thing, guys, and I'll jump in. Answer after I'm done, Sam, real quick. Just seeing how badly Biden did, I was surprised as well. Just seeing how badly he did. How is the establishment going to react to this? Are eyebrows raised at this? Like, wait a minute, this guy's really this weak? Or they're looking Kamala as like the stealth candidate? Like, what's your take on that? Because I feel like he was surprisingly weak. I mean, that was awful. I mean, it really was bad.
Well,
so how's the establishment viewing this, Sam? And thank you for everything, guys. Take care.
All right, thanks. I appreciate the call. I mean, I was not surprised But I think even for him, yes, this was a bad couple of days.
Well, we got to remember, this is a guy who got schlonged by Michael Dukakis in 1988, right?
Just be careful when you go after Dukakis.
Mike Dukakis had super wicked awesome ideas about traffic grids.
The dude shoveled his own walk, all right? So, all right.
But I still think people had the idea of Biden versus Paul Ryan in their minds.
Yeah, Biden did very well against Paul Ryan. I just want to say.
But I think what's happening, I don't think that people are going to jump. I don't think the establishment, to the extent that, and I don't think as much of the establishment had lined up behind Biden in the way that people might think. I think they thought, like, as long as he does well, then he's good. But again, I think there's a threshold where people are going to leave in droves because, and I would guess that support, they're waiting to see, and it's a dynamic too, right? It's not just a question of Biden drops at this point. If I think they're waiting to see how well Kamala Harris bumps up.
I think that's totally true.
And so if she rises in the polls, I think you'll see people leaving Biden. I think they would go to her first, Warren second, assuming nobody else is available. Because I think there's a lot of fear about Bernie. But it really depends on what's going to happen with Iowa and New Hampshire. Although I think, like I say, by the end of September and October, the establishment is either going to go all in on Joe or all out on Joe.
My only caution, I would say, is you're totally right. He was not going to stay as popular as he was when he first announced, because it is the Hillary Clinton principle. It's like nobody's really assessing him. He's Obama's vice president. But I'm not at a point yet where I would just say, like, oh yeah, he's totally done. I don't know about that. And I wouldn't bank on him always underperforming like this. It would be great, but I wouldn't bank on him.
Calling from a 514 area code. Huh?
Hello?
Hello, who's this?
Oh, hi. This is Rogue Fembot. I'm calling from a 541 area
541.
code,
I'm
not
sorry
a
about that.
514.
I'm sorry. You're Ferguson. What? Fembot?
Rogue Fembot.
What is
it? Just call me Bot.
Oh, Rogue
Anyway.
Fembot. Rogue Fembot. Of course. Yes. Rogue Fembot. Yes.
Shooting everyone with their titty guns.
Well, I'm calling from rural Oregon, and there were a couple things in your interview today that I really didn't hear Mr. McCann talk about, and I think really need to be talked about to understand both currently what's going on in Salem and also what happened at the wildlife refuge.
Okay.
So the thing about Oregon is that Oregon's working class is incredibly racially divided, like really bad. Most people don't realize this, but in Oregon state constitution, it literally bans Black people from even coming. And that history does not go away. And there's a very big divide there.
It doesn't presently.
Well, it doesn't presently, but the original state constitution when the state was created.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm just saying, that history just does not go away, and especially when you look at the types of jobs, the work that's available in this state. Pretty much you have farms, you have ranches, and then you have Portland, which is just god awful. And I don't talk about Portland. I'm 300 miles away from it, and I hate it. And the second thing about Oregon that I think is really important to understand is that a lot of the environmental policy has really hurt rural people. So Mr. McCann talked about this very slightly in the interview, but the reason why the once richest county in Oregon became one of the poorest is because of the spotted owl. So, you know, I'm an environmentalist. I want to protect the spotted owl. But what happened is, you know, these lumber companies that were, you know, just absolutely clear-cutting forests and doing horrible things, they were only stopped by the feds wanting to protect the spotted owl. And the problem with that is all of these working people, you know, my dad was a mill worker, were out of a job. And it basically happened overnight, as far as I remember it. I was, you know, a very small kid. It didn't help that this was also around the time that Clinton did welfare reform, I think it was. So, you know, my family went from being pretty stable and pretty okay to suddenly, you know, I really don't even think my dad ever had a steady job after that. And, you know, I can't speak for the Bundys, and I'm sure they are way wealthier than my family has ever been. But when you're looking for a place to drum up anger against environmentalists, Oregon's a great place for that. I mean, like the hatred of the spotted owl is so known that there was literally a AAA video game that took place in Oregon, and the conservative of that game was bitching about the spotted owl. Wow. So it's just, you know, I could see why ranchers who were upset about this turtle, apparently, you know, also found people who you know, were complaining about an owl, and they saw similarities there, and they decided to go there. And that's also probably what broke up that county as well, the wildlife refuge, because even if you don't agree with these people's policies or their politics, rather, a lot of rural people in the state feel on a very visceral level just how airheaded a lot of this environmental policy has been. Which is why we need something like the Green New Deal. We need a jobs guarantee.
Well, that's the idea. Yeah,
training.
you need to do that in the context of any major policy move, and in this instance, it was a policy move that was major relative to the locale. I mean, it's interesting insofar as, and I'm not diminishing it. I'm just actually more. I think like people should think about the reasons why this is the case. One of the big complaints about Uber, to the extent that people actually, you know, big complaints about Uber, you know, make it into the mainstream, was the way that they changed their pricing. A lot of people, particularly in New York, I mean, I think this is maybe New York centric, but went out and invested in buying like 2 cars. 3 cars, hiring other people to work for them, trying to create businesses. And Uber changed the pricing sort of overnight. A lot of people lost their shirt. And it's a similar dynamic. You don't hear businesses criticized in that way in the main. But yes, you're right. I mean, that's why if we're going to have policies that are going to end up displacing people, we need to have, along with those policies, some mechanism in which to support these people, whether it's supporting them to go into another industry or supporting them with some type of like early pension type of situation. There has to be a mechanism for that.
Yeah, and the thing that just like deeply irritates me about this too is that you know, like talking to people about, you know, Oregon and how we as a state are, you know, kind of, there's a lot of different biomes in this state, and that, you know, when you factor in climate change is kind of a big deal. We have a lot of rivers, we have a lot of forest land, we also have the desert, and it's one of those things where there is so much work we can do here. We could be a green powerhouse state, and I really want that. But unfortunately, it's just been a lot of people in Salem and Portland making these laws, doing this policy, and I don't feel like, any of my people are at the table to talk about, how this is going to affect, our lives.
Right.
And you mentioned Uber, and funny story about Uber. So I'm in a rural part of the state, but we already have Uber, and the problem with it right now is that we were just starting to get a pretty good public transit system going, and
Uber's going to undercut it.
There is. It definitely. We're already seeing that starting to happen.
Oish.
And it's just really, really unfortunate.
Well, hang in there. Appreciate the call, Rogue Fembot in Oregon. Donald Trump was in at the G20 summit, and at one point he jumped over to North Korea. Here he is, though, giving his Monday morning quarterback take on the debates. He was asked by, what's this guy's name? John Carl, in Osaka at the Imperial Hotel, Osaka, Japan.
Lovely
at the
place.
G20. It's okay. Trump, it's all right. Here we go.
I'm sure you saw the exchange between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the issue of federal busing, federally mandated busing. Biden thought that was a bad policy. He tried to stop it. Kamala Harris said it was an important part of desegregation, including in her own experience. Where do you stand on that issue of federally mandated busing?
Well, first of all, before I get into that, I thought that she was given too much credit. He didn't do well, certainly, and maybe the facts weren't necessarily on his side. I think she was given too much credit for what she did. Wasn't that outstanding? And I think probably he was hit harder than he should have been hit. Biden. I thought he was hit actually harder. And as far as that, I will tell you in about 4 weeks, because we're coming out with certain policy that's going to be very interesting and very surprising, I think, to a lot of people. Jennifer, do you have a question?
But do you think Kamala Harris would be a tough opponent for you, given what you saw in that debate?
You never know who's going to be tough. You never know.
He seems tired. But the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, we're only 4 weeks away from a policy that is going to, in some way, inspire the idea of busing.
I was going to say.
What do you think? Do you think that in his mind, first of all, it indicates to me that he feels like he doesn't know anything about busing.
Of course not.
Now, to the extent that he thinks he knows something about busing. Now, so there's a couple of scenarios. One is he knows nothing about busing, and it was just a classic Trump lie. He altered it a little bit, because usually you'd say 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks. But so there's a major policy coming out in 4 weeks. Now, he could think he knows what busing is about, and the policy could be literally about buses, like with new safety features on buses.
Yeah, I'm going to go with he thinks busing is about merely getting kids to school.
Or it could be like, we're good. No one's allowed to take a bus.
A lot of people think they should walk.
No more buses.
Metro cards.
Those kids should work out.
Or maybe he has a national plan to integrate schools.
It's lift to
Maybe
school.
we have a national rollback Brown v. Board plan.
Or it could be they're coming out with some type of voucher plan.
I'm going to actually guess that it's a twofer. In his head, it's a new monster truck program, which the kids will like and will look good in 2020. And his advisors are devising a really horrible voucher program
I don't think
now.
And I don't even think he's referring to that. I think he's just lying. I think.
But
here's a follow-up question on that.
Thank you. I have a question about the border, but I just wanted to follow up quickly on the question about busing. Do you see it as a viable way of integrating schools? Does that relate to the policy that you're going to unveil?
Well, it has been something that they've done for a long period of time. I mean, there aren't that many ways you're going to get people to schools. So this is something that's been done.
Nailed it.
In some cases, it's been done with a hammer instead of a velvet glove, and that's part of it. But this has been certainly a thing that's been used over the. I think if Vice President Biden had answered the question somewhat differently, it would have been a different result, because they really did hit him hard on that one. So, but it is certainly a primary method of getting people to schools.
And does it relate to the policy that you're going to unveil?
Pause it. Wait a second. Wait. What is now? Who is this? What's her face? I can't. Yeah. The idea, like, does she not realize in that moment that he doesn't know what busing is? Like, does she just go like, no, I'm sorry, sir. Like, I guess maybe you can't ask, like, hey, also, just incidentally, could you remind everybody what busing refers to?
Yeah, Joe Biden thought the kids should get to school some other way. That guy's so stupid.
This
is how we get kids to school, folks.
Most kids want to have their folks drive them or go in a town car. So you gotta like velvet glove it when they come into the bus. You gotta say, like, maybe make the bus a nicer bus. He doesn't know what it is, but Kristen Welker, right? But I wonder, like, does she not know that he doesn't know what it is? Let's go back.
President Biden had answered the question somewhat differently, it would have been a different result, because they really did hit him hard on that one. So, but it is certainly a primary method of getting people to schools.
And does it relate to the policy that you're going to unveil that you just floated?
It relates to everything we're doing, and you'll be hearing about it over the next couple of months.
Over the next couple of months? Okay. And I want to ask you...
I just doubled it. I doubled the timeline. It was 4 weeks, but it's really a couple of months. Look, here's the thing. We're unveiling a walking initiative. Everybody's going to walk.
All white kids go to school in Lincoln Continentals.
Lincoln Continentals. That is...
He's going to ban buses.
Come on.
It's time for a bus ban.
And all the reporters are sitting there. They just must be so cowed. Like, how do you not, like, how does one of you just not say, well, I know how they don't?
I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like that question, she's like, is this going to pertain to the policy you just floated? Was her trying to protect his blushes from being, like, obviously just not knowing what busing even means in America?
No, people need to ask the hard questions, which is, you have no idea what this thing is, do you?
Yeah. What is this?
Yeah. Mr. President,
you don't need to be harsh
This
about
is why
it. You could just be like, could you explain what that is, sir?
We need to start a program where reporters get their YouTube clicks monetized, so that they're incentivized to ask a question like, you know what? This is where I cash in. Yeah. Do you know what you're talking about? And then that, we've got to figure out a way. Maybe we do some type of like hybrid GoFundMe, because someone like any of these reporters are thinking like, well, I'm not going to get a bump from ABC or MSNBC or NBC. Yeah, I'm just going to get my credentials bumped, and then I'm just going to end up having to cover, either like, I don't know, some horrible subcommittee hearing, or get fired.
You raise money for a weekly award or something?
They actually had a system like that at Gawker, and it does pit journalists against each other in a really nasty way. But in this instance, yes, it might be helpful.
Real shame. All right, now, of course, at the G20 summit, what is this one on the right? Is that the one with Ivanka? Okay, yeah. So at the G20 summit, Ivanka Trump was brought as a senior advisor. Did she get like an official title? Yeah.
Global
Senior
ambassador for daughters you'd like to bone.
Now, I don't think that's the official
Also,
title.
senior strategic advisor or whatever. Doesn't matter. She's an advisor to the president and a hottie to all the dads. Am I right?
I guess I'm sensitive to this because I have a lot of times where I bring my children to a place they've never been before, and they feel somewhat intimidated. They go to camp, like Brendan's young enough that he remembers the anxiety associated with that. go to camp for the first day, and you look around, you're like, I don't know anybody. Everybody seems to be smarter or cooler.
Hey, I
taller
feel that way
than me.
right now.
And I feel uncomfortable, and I don't know what to do. And I'll just go throw myself into this conversation. Those moments of uncomfortability, I tell my kids, are perfectly fine. Anybody who holds it against you is a jerk. And you don't need to deal with jerks, and it's a good way of weeding out the jerks. That way you can go through life with your own jerk weed outer device. However, the calculation gets a little different when you're an adult. And, it's one thing to go to let's say a conference of biologists and walk in there and they're all talking about biology. You want to jump in and just go hey, how about...
Yeah, protoplasm, am I right?
Tell you about it. I'm getting a little fat around here. Biologist, you just throw in because you don't know anything. You don't know anything, right? You're just like, well, what's going on here with this hair growing out of my ears? Right? Am I right? Anybody? Well, Ivanka Trump had one of those moments. She is in a room full of world leaders. She is not a world leader. She was appointed, whatever she is, by her dad. And none of these people really respect her dad. You can imagine the disdain that they have with Ivanka. And here it is. They're all basically trying to, this is like a scene from Heathers. Except for they're all Heathers. There's no one here you feel sympathetic about.
They're all really bad people.
These are all really bad people. The only thing that's enjoyable about this is watching the lack of honor amongst bad people in terms of letting one into their club.
Yes, but this is about social justice. And
it's all, yeah. As soon as you start talking about the economic aspect of it, though, a lot of people start listening who wouldn't otherwise listen.
And the same with the defense side of it.
Yeah.
In terms of
I have an
man, Christine Lagarde is a very mean woman. She's not your friend.
She's not.
You're the real cool person.
She's really
because you know what real coolness is? Stilted hand movements.
So, just for people who couldn't see it, Macron is there. Oh, is that Trudeau right with us? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And May and the head of the EU.
IMF.
And IMF.
Christine Lagarde.
And Ivanka is doing that thing, but worse. Where you tell a joke and you're like, oh, and they fell on their face, and people go fell on their face and laugh. But she's doing that for people who are not doing laugh lines. She's literally just repeating what they're saying, and you can hear her throughout. We got to play this again. And the best is Lacar's look on her face.
She's just very French.
I can't believe I got to even be aware of this.
French.
I have a theory about this.
As soon as you start talking about the economic aspect of it, though, a lot of people start listening who wouldn't otherwise listen.
And the same with the defense side of it. In terms of the whole sort of ecosystem, it's been very male-dominated. So.
It looks like Ivanka's like a ghost, and nobody else can see her there.
I'm so scared that's going to be me at commie camp, guys.
You know what the second most funny thing about this clip is, though, is that Theresa May and Christine Lagarde and Macron are discussing social justice.
And she's going, and it's very male-dominated.
Yeah.
With the twinkle fingers.
Hey, man, anybody, the biggest idiot can master woke
babe.
Discourse.
Tell him.
Yeah, exactly. It's super male-dominated.
Super male-dominated.
You got it.
You're a nice little girl. Now go away.
Oh yeah, you're gonna wear the sort of 19th century girl in trouble.
Oh my
now,
god!
Now I have a theory
Lagarde's
that this was I got to get up there and get some pictures taken of me, hand gestures, because we want to be able to see that you were the one doing the talking, and holding court with all of these world leaders.
She did make a lot of hand gestures.
I think that was. I honestly think that. She has a photographer who's do some hand gestures so it looks like you're talking.
And she wore the big sleeves as if to accentuate the hand gestures.
Deep conversations with important people.
Wow, you really are really taking no prisoners, sweetie.
Real smart.
Good stuff. I'm taking you on the next trip.
I love that they have like the two it's so amazing though when you think about like the sick projections his kids are of him, because it's like she's the part of him that wants to pretend, that's like, I want to be invited to the royal castle and we'll all have tea and like that
Right.
kind of delusion. And then like the idiot son on Twitter, like, it turns out Kamala Harris is even born here, is like how he actually gets things done.
There's Nathan Fielder. I guess done in sympathy for.
This was a bit earlier, but
Ivanka Trump. Snapshot of him out in the town, having the time of my life with a bunch of friends. They're all just out of frame, laughing too.
That is an evergreen tweet that works in so many
good.
scenarios.
So good.
Little Michael Tracy vibe to that tweet.
What? Oh boy, I did not say that. You said that.
What?
You said that.
What? No.
Let's keep going with Trump. Wait, do we have him at the G20, Colin? Trump's bragging about what's happening with America right now in the G20. If you're a business owner, you may not be aware of what you're calling America. This is clip number 5. You may not be aware of how we're referring to America these days, but as a small business owner myself, I'm perfectly aware of how we refer to America. But here's Donald Trump letting you know.
Activity. We have a lot of activity now where companies are coming back to our country with a hot show, with the hottest show in town, with the hottest show in the world right now. Our economy is the best. One thing that every leader, virtually every leader that I dealt with said is that congratulations, it's incredible what's happened to the American economy. We're the best economy in the world. And it's something, and it started from Election Day. I put it out yesterday because we took a tremendous boost from the day after I got elected. The stock market went crazy from that point until essentially now. I think we hit in certain of the markets, we hit the all-time high again for many, many times. I can't tell you what it was, but many, many times we broke the record. And our stock market is great. Our jobs are great. We have the best job numbers essentially we've ever had. In some categories, definitely we've ever had.
Stock market. I don't know. Like,
how do you translate that?
We have a
to
lot
Japanese?
of listeners and viewers who are from the rest of the world, and I just want to say I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what else to say to you. I apologize.
I would like to add, I'm sorry that we're crushing you so badly.
Hot show.
Yeah, it's
This
the
is the
hottest
hot show.
in town. Sorry, and I'm also sorry to your translators.
I can tell you that the stock market obviously has been on a tear. I can tell you that about 80% of the country, citizenship, do not own stocks. I can also tell you that to the extent that judging our economy in terms of shareholder value, ask those people on those 737s that went down, that shareholder value was increased by the $9 an hour they were paying, like some of the computer coders. Shareholder value was increased because, and I did this, did we run this interview with Bill Lazanik on this show? The one from Ring of Fire? I don't know if we ever did. We should grab that one. Maybe I'll have Lazanik on to talk about this story. Boeing had an opportunity a couple of decades ago to change the way, the basic structure of their airplanes. Boeing had built their the basic structure of their airplanes to deal with airports that did not have elevated walkways. And when elevated walkways were in, they had to redesign their planes, but make some adjustments. At one point, they could have gone a wholesale change, like Airbus did. But Boeing didn't, so they had to compensate with materials and the shape of their engines, I guess. And that's what led to the problems with the 737. They needed to institute software fixes for what was essentially a hardware problem. And the software fixes were not communicated in the proper way. And Bill Lazonick traces that back to basically a decision because they didn't want to lose stock value. So aside from it not being a good measure as to how the vast majority of Americans are doing, it's also far more problematic, frankly. You can also look at industries like the for-profit college industry, which it is true, literally on the day he was elected, shot up like a rocket and have remained up there because they knew they would be in an environment where there's no regulation. We will be able to rip off people without any accountability. And that continues unabated. Betsy DeVos is like rolling out and rolling back all sorts of protections for students that existed during the Obama administration. That was one thing they actually did quite well in the last term. So there's Donald Trump with the hot show. People are saying that to me all the time. You got a hot show. Here's one more clip from there. This is about his student visas. Clip number 7 at the G20. Donald Trump is going around talking to world leaders about how they're going to only take the cream of the crop. Here he is. He's going to, he's telling the leaders around the country, don't worry about the student visas.
Great universities. They've been great students and tremendous assets. But we did discuss it. It was brought up as a point. And I said that will be just like anybody else, just like any other nation. And we're actually going to a point where, we're looking that if you graduate from a college, because our great companies, we talk about Silicon Valley and other places, we have a problem with this in our country, that you graduate number one in your class from the best school in the country, and they say you have to leave. We can't keep them. And we're going to make it, we're going to call it the smart person's waiver, but we're going to make it so that they can not only stay, but maybe they have access to green cards. We want to keep these people here.
Okay, this is what he's talking about. It sounded like to normal people that he was saying college students in America. But what he's saying is that college students come over, they graduate from foreign countries, they graduate top of the class, they want to go work for an American company, but they have to leave because they don't have a student, they don't have a work visa because they had a student visa.
I was stuck on the smart person's waiver thing.
That's probably the official.
Damn. That's a good title.
SPW.
Can we just say that's fascinating about that is that the one area, and I don't support, like I'm pretty relaxed about these things, but like one of the smart things to distinguish when you just generically talk about immigration is basically like a bunch of very low income, very exploitative and deeply abusive jobs that a lot of undocumented people do. And like an example, like the meatpacking industry, and the companies that hire them don't get held accountable for their just numerous violations, right? But like in
they're
Silicon,
on a not smart person waiver.
What's amazing is that Silicon Valley is probably one of the only areas that if you wanted to just make like we got to get people in the States here well-paying jobs first before we think about relatively privileged immigrants who could probably do just as well in China or India or Kenya. That's like the one area where that argument has some validity. And that's like the one area where he's just like, yeah, we should just make sure that those people can be here, no problem.
Also, think about
that. I mean, that is the complete fulfillment of every single populist lie he's ever told in the economy.
Think about the pressure that puts on kids, immigrant kids. Like, you better get LAs or you're out of here.
Oh,
buddy.
Absolutely. It's terrorism.
All right. And here is Donald Trump. This is the last Trump we have, right? Yeah, where he's meeting with Kim Jong-un. Okay, this is Tucker Carlson talking about Donald Trump's historic visit with North Korean leader Kim Kim Jong-un. Tucker apparently was brought along on the trip. He pushed out John Bolton. Maybe he is our new Secretary of State. I imagine not, but here he is talking about trying to justify Donald Trump basically giving Un a big domestic victory. Not necessarily a bad idea, but a very weird way of explaining it by Tucker Carlson.
That's the type of thing that does make some people nervous, though. President Trump recently made a comment about having a certain type of good chemistry with Kim Jong-un. And that may be true, but when you're talking about someone who has been responsible for so many human rights abuses, does he run a risk with that kind of language of A, coming off to Kim Jong-un like he's pandering to him to an extent, or B, upsetting the American public that elected a president that they want to stand firm and be tough on those human rights violations and stand firm on American principles, which exist in virtually complete contrast to how the North Korean regime is run?
Yeah, I mean, there's no defending the North Korean regime, which is a monstrous regime. It's the last really Stalinist regime in the world. It's a disgusting place, obviously, and so there's no defending it. On the other hand, you know, you've got to be honest about what it means to lead a country. It means killing people. Not on the scale that the North Koreans do, but a lot of countries commit atrocities, including a number that we're closely allied with. So, you know, I'm not a relativist or anything, but it's important to be honest about that. And it's not necessarily a choice between, you know, the evil people and the great people. It's a choice most of the time between the bad people and the worst people. That's just kind of the nature of life and certainly the nature of power. And I do think that's how the president sees it. He's far less sentimental about this stuff and maybe, I think, more realistic about it. I don't agree with everything that Trump says, but this is one thing I do agree with. Mm-hmm. You know, there is a kind of Samantha Power, you know, dorm room, like, oh, they're so mean. And it's kind of silly and stupid and not helpful. Like, in the end, what matters is what's good for the United States. And you deal with bad people a lot of the time in order to help your own country. And that's kind of the way I think Trump sees it.
Now, some of that I think is fair enough. I don't think that you should justify meeting with Kim Jong-un by basically saying we should lower the standards for everybody else. And he is being a relativist. I don't know if that's necessarily bad in and of itself.
He's so weaselly. Whenever someone says, I'm not a relativist, but they're probably about to do moral relativism.
Right. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with relativism, but the idea that you're not going to, that in some way you're justifying it by saying, like, look, everybody kills, you're lowering the expectations. And you're basically saying this is the way that it should work. I would also argue that there is no indication that this is in the U.S.'s best interest. I don't know that there's anything wrong with Trump's actions other than the fact that follow-through does not seem to be the issue for him. And in the hands of someone else, maybe I would feel a little bit more comfortable with what the follow-through is going to be. In this instance, of course, if there were genuine interest in some type of making the world safer, they wouldn't have breached the Iran deal and broken it and basically started, theoretically contained one fire, theoretically, because that's what it sounds like, and then started another. But Tucker Carlson, of course, this is a very convenient position for Tucker Carlson to take, because while I think it's a good thing, having, talking is always a good thing, I think. If you got to be a little circumspect about it in terms of like what kind of legitimacy you offer to people or how you use and leverage the legitimacy they perceive. But Tucker Carlson hasn't always had this perspective. Here he is, all the way back. Now, some of the younger folks in the audience may not remember this, but this is almost a year and a half ago. A little bit less. For some of our 16-month-old listeners, may not recall this, but here's Tucker Carlson tweeting out, progressives have a long history of supporting the world's most repressive regimes. It's hard to find a dictator to the left hasn't supported. Chairman Mao, Hugo Chavez, Idi Amin. What do all these people have in common? They all hate America. Tucker at Fox News.
Damn right.
Now, I think Idi Amin's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
I think that's a stretch. And I also think maybe we could historically disaggregate. Some people might have supported Mao when they thought he was a revolutionary overcoming feudalism. And then, what was the last one? Chavez?
Chavez.
Oh, yeah. I totally support Chavez.
Wasn't it Nixon?
Right about that.
Is Nixon part of the left or something? Or?
Nixon was on the left when he met with Mao.
Was Chavez ever accused of not randomly, I guess, killing people?
I mean, he was accused of abuses, but certainly not of cutting up a journalist in an embassy, as an example.
Yeah, no Mohammed bin Salman stuff,
and he's
or
certainly not
Kim
running
Jong-un.
gulags, not literally
stuff.
running gulags
Right.
in 2019. But can I just say real quick? I mean, one, I definitely think all things being equal, I absolutely much prefer Trump as talking than not talking with North Korea, and I'm not interested in scoring hawk points on it. I encourage them to talk, and I think especially if you hand the presidency over to somebody who's smarter and more competent and more ethical, but doesn't revert to the mean in terms of U.S. foreign policy, this might have set some good preconditions for that. So I'm glad they're talking. But this goes back to the Bill O'Reilly with Trump thing from a couple years ago when Trump was like, oh, you think we're so innocent about our relative human rights abuses. And it's just, what's interesting is that clearly that Samantha Power position is getting totally shrunk out of the public discourse. And it should be. Humanitarian interventionism is a failure. But the real contestation, obviously, is do you create something new that still actually puts value on human well-being, or do you just revert to pure cynicism? So I want to just, and that's what Tucker represents. That's what Tucker represents.
Like at one point you hear Tucker talking, you're like, oh, he's recognizing a fact that we've been arguing for a long time. Like we do bad things. And then he's saying, and that's okay.
And that's okay. And the problem is,
and that's the problem.
And the problem is, the other problem is that most of the responses to Tucker that I see broadly speaking amongst liberals and the left, are both wrong, right? Like there's some people on the left that are so funneled into, oh my God, Tucker's saying something that's true. This is amazing. They're missing the pure cynicism of it. And then there's liberals who are doing the whole this isn't who we are. Right. How dare you, Tucker? Right. When you look like a delusional. It's precisely
and we
who we are.
Better.
And we have to change.
As opposed to we should accept it about ourselves.
And what does that actually entail?
And
what does that actually entail to change? I mean, that's a major project.
They always do this about everything. Like the Tucker Carlson Trumpian politics are politics of negation. They're negating the kind of liberal ideology that's been hegemonic in most circles for a really long time. It's the same thing as when people complain about kids dying in ICE facilities, right? And they say, well, that happened under Obama too. That's what my friend's dad said in rural Rhode Island the other night. Oh, it happened under Obama too. That doesn't make it okay. That makes it extra bad.
Right.
I would also just like to add really briefly on North Korea, because I see Murphy, who I think is one of the better people in foreign policy in the Democratic Party, and Warren. They've both tweeted out a bunch of cliches about this. From my internationalist perspective, this is what the president of South Korea wants. He supports this process 100%. And he's both progressive and internationalist and has good credentials. And to say the least, has the highest stakes about how this thing goes. So let's follow his lead on this.
I think that makes sense. And of course, Laura Ingraham, though, we should just for good measure, just to show the enormous hypocrisy around here. I don't know. It's sort of silly, but why not? Laura Ingraham, it's 5 p.m. Eastern, which means President Obama must be meeting with some dictator somewhere. Are there any left? I mean, I think we can agree that Un is, as far as dictators go, he's the gold standard.
He's up there.
Right? I mean, who's more dictatorial?
The last dictator
What is a
standing.
more authoritarian dictatorial state than North Korea?
None.
Right?
None.
This is.
I don't think there's any place in the world with less internal contestation.
Right. This is like being locked in somebody's basement. Yes. And he shows up and he's just like, it will put the lotion in the basket to his people.
But also, like, it is the progressive left and the soc dem left and the socialist left's job to present an alternative to this kind of smarmy liberalism that Tucker Carlson is constantly negating and calling out the hypocrisy of in a way that makes sense, both logistically and morally.
Well, to that point, Bernie Sanders was asked about Trump meeting Kim Jong-un on George Stephanopoulos' program. Here's Bernie's reply.
I have no problem with him sitting down with Kim Jong-un in North Korea or any place else. But I don't want it simply to be a photo opportunity. The whole world's media was attracted there. What's going to happen tomorrow and the next day? He has weakened the State Department. If we're going to bring peace to this world, we need a strong State Department. We need to move forward diplomatically, not just do photo opportunities. And right now, while he is, meeting with Kim Jong-un, he is still provocative in terms of almost moving toward a war with Iran. He vetoed legislation that I supported and that we won in the Senate and won in the House, which would get the United States out of the horrific war in Yemen, which is led by the brutal dictator Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. So I don't have a problem with him sitting down and negotiating with our adversaries. I just don't want it to be a photo opportunity. We need real diplomacy.
So you aren't going to take the bait on this? Really? And the bottom line is, it is a photo op, and there is no substance behind this. And at the very least, I don't know what the agenda was. My understanding, the agenda was get them to give up nukes. And now they sound like they're going to go. They're going into a fallback position of no more nukes for the time being, and then we'll give you everything you want. I don't know. Less nukes is better than more nukes. No nukes is better than some nukes.
You saying no nukes is good nukes?
No nukes is good nukes.
What about fission? Guys are being serious about the climate.
Meanwhile, we've mentioned the words abolish. It's unbelievable. We're going to do this story tomorrow. But apparently, the Border Patrol has a problem. And this is not, is anybody surprised about this?
No.
The Border Patrol, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow, but the Border Patrol has a problem. There are internal groups of people within the Border Patrol who are incredible, I don't know, what would you call them? White nationalists, neo-Nazis? Scumbags, fascists. Is anybody surprised? If anything, the surprise would be that there's none those in that patrol based upon what they're asked to do.
Yeah, no one thinks they're woke.
Exactly. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. In the meantime, yesterday, I guess this was this today or yesterday in New Jersey? Yesterday, a Jewish group, I'm not sure what they were called. Is it If Not Now?
The protest was Jews Against ICE. We'll check out if it was If Not Now.
There's basically a concentration camp in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And apparently 36 Jewish protesters were arrested in staging this protest and calling attention to this thing. Here it is.
Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on, my people? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my people?
So
that's a never again action.
And they're holding a sign that says never again means never again. And it really is
calling
just a question.
Chuck Todd. Very offensive comparison.
Very offensive comparison. I mean, again, we've talked about this, but the question is, at what point do you say we're going to protest this? At what point do you say, like, okay, I mean, do you wait? Now, obviously, people have died in custody. And obviously, the treatment is bad enough to have inspectors and judges recoil. So at what point do you say this is on a path? Doesn't mean it's going to get there where you're gassing people or killing people in these camps, but it's on a path that could, under certain circumstances, lead to it. What are you going to do? And so good for these folks. I don't know if we have any information on how you can join up with them. We will let you know. Meanwhile, apparently a Canadian cartoonist, I don't know if he was working for a paper or what, but political cartoon, here it is. It's an image of Donald Trump having just gotten out of his golf cart, looking down at the bodies of the 2 immigrants who died recently trying to cross the Rio Grande. This is a 25-year-old man and his 23-month-old daughter. He apparently brought her across the river, went to go back in to help his wife. The daughter wanted to be with him, so she came out into the water with him. It appears maybe he was trying to keep her on his back as he was going through the water, and so put her under his shirt. And whatever happened, they both drowned. And the image is horrific. But the idea of Donald Trump getting out of his golf cart and saying, do you mind if I play through to them? I think captures exactly the sentiment he has through this. If anything, you could say it is too sympathetic to Trump that he's asking. Even if he's doing it just paying lip service, because I don't even think he paid lip service to this. So the cartoonist Michael DeAdder was let go from all the newspapers in New Brunswick, Canada, by his distributor or publishing company. And
he went on a long sort of tweet thread about it. I think maybe the nub is here.
He says, in the past 2 weeks, I drew 3 Trump cartoons. 2 went viral. The third went supernova. A day later, I was let go. And not only let go, the cartoons they had already had in the can were not used. Overnight, it was like I never worked for the paper. Make your own conclusions. With this said, I've been giving the NB newspapers what they wanted for several months. Trump wasn't on my radar. I work for Canadian newspapers, so there's no need to cover Trump 24/7. Canadian politics is quite interesting right now. The premier of New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs, is a former Irving oil executive, and any cartoon I drew was slightly critical of, was systematically axed. You know why I was let go? I wanted to do my job as an editorial cartoonist, and they wanted me to do their job. It's a distraction from the big picture, it says Donald Trump. It gets to the point where I didn't submit any Trump cartoons for fear that I might be fired. Does it matter if I was fired over one Donald Trump cartoon when every Donald Trump cartoon I submitted in the past year was axed? I do this reluctantly and only because I'm cornered. I don't know how it happened, but I feel my credibility is on the line. All I did was lose my job, but I will defend myself and I will talk about why I think it was let go. It was my perspective, and clearly they have their perspective. Misspelled there. I could write a thesis on my experience at the newspaper that would be captivating, but you know what? I'm not going to. They gave me 17 years of employment and a job when the Daily News folded, and what would that say about me? Anyways, he's going on this rant. I mean, obviously, look, this cartoon, it captures a real dynamic.
Eloquent in its simplicity.
I don't know if the guy has a GoFundMe thing or he's going to set up some type of Patreon or something like that. I hope they realize that he realizes that he can do this type of thing. I should also say the nib is being let go from First Look Media. And you can Google that and support the Nib, which also does some really great cartooning, political cartooning.
In fact, when they published this cartoon, they paid Dieter for it.
Oh, they did?
Yep.
So check out the Nib as well. They could use your support. All right, we don't have too much time. We'll get to some of the other stuff tomorrow. We just got time for, it's 2:48. All right, one phone call, and then we're out of here. Sorry, you've been holding for 98 minutes. Calling from a 703 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? We got a lot of people who've been on hold for a long time. Sorry, folks. We'll take a bunch of calls either tomorrow or Tuesday. 703, who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Sam.
Yes.
Oh, hello, Sam. This is Maxwell from Maryland.
Hello, Maxwell. What's on your mind?
So I have a brief Seb Gorka story.
All right, let's hear it. You're the final caller of the day.
I was a bartender. Oh, I appreciate it. I'm a bartender in D.C. He comes in with his wife and a couple friends. I had the pleasure to take care of him. I had no one else in the whole restaurant knew who he was, so I was very, very happy I got to take care of him. I was like, oh my God, that's Sebastian Gorka, literal fascist right here. And everyone was like, I have no idea who that is. So I go over to the table and I'm like, hey, what's going on? What you guys want? And he's like, I want a steak well done. And so I get him the steak and he gets a salad. And he's with his wife. I didn't know at the time his wife is his financier. Literally funds him or and all
her
that.
The check.
Yeah. So I got to take care of him. He ate it so GD fast. He ate it so fast, like he hadn't eaten in a few days. And I got to be like, hey, are you Sebastian Gorka? He was like, yeah. And he had that pin on, too. He had that thing, apparently, that's some, awful fascist thing. I wasn't aware of any of this. This is before I really started watching the show. And he's like, that's me as well. You're right. I was like, yeah, I thought I'd seen you on TV. He was like, yes, I don't go on TV anymore, or I have a radio. And it was very, very bizarre. It tipped me very well. He paid with his card. I have the number available if you guys want it at all.
Do you still work at that restaurant?
Well, they promoted me to not bartender anymore. So even if he were to, I wouldn't be able to take care of him, but I would definitely get him a free steak on the house for sure.
I'm just saying, though, if you were to give us the credit card number, how much trouble would you get into?
Who are you? No, I mean,
it would be funny, but
they don't
you
know
obviously
should
not to just kick a little contribution to Ilhan Omar. That would be
funny.
the comedy thing to do.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Act Blue. What?
Act Blue. $55 to Ilhan Omar. They've cracked the system. My leasing payments will be off.
So.
That's unbelievable. Well, listen, if he comes in again, what should we do? What? I don't know what you can do.
Salutations from the MR universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Just say that.
Of course.
He blocked me a long time ago on Twitter.
Sad.
Yeah, or I'll just poop on him. Just pee on him. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate it. Yeah, make sure that steak gets extra seasoning, if you know what I mean.
Oh yes, a little extra spice in your dice there, sir.
I appreciate the call. All right, there you go. All right, folks, that's all the time we have. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding heads are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the rope that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive